in the mountains. It's a hard day of racing for everybody here. It's almost 100 miles just inside by a fraction, and it's right down on the Spanish border. Leaving Bagnères de Bigorre, the riders go round almost in a circle till they get to the finish in Luz Ardiden, but the early part of the course is fairly undulating and should be open to some attacking riding style. But it's not until the riders get well into the course that we start to see the Pyrenees looming up in front of them. The Col d'Aspin is a very famous climb that climbs up to 1,500 meters in altitude, but it's really just an hors d'oeuvre for the big one of the Pyrenees, the Col du Tourmalet. A slight descent into the valley and then up to the summit of Luz Ardiden, 1,715 meters. That's about 5,500 feet in altitude.
Well, this is a wonderful stage, there's no doubt about that. The 9th time we've made a start or a finish here at Bagnères de Bigorre, and the 7th time we'll have climbed to the summit of Luz Ardiden, Pedro Delgado winning the first climb, in fact, in 1985. Veronk has stitched up the King of the Mountains yesterday. He now leads by 137 points. He still has to pedal his way to Paris, and still the same 8-point margin for Baden Cook against Robbie McEwen there. We've just got 948 kilometres to go, but they are sensational kilometres. 3 riders, as we know, covered by just a few seconds. And the rumour is today that Lance Armstrong is going to try and attack Jan Ullrich. But then the Germans are saying the rumour is today that Jan Ullrich is going to try and attack Lance Armstrong. So it depends which camp you come on. This was the start this morning, stage 15. The rollout. The yellow jersey, he's had it for a week now, Lance Armstrong, but it's never been a safe bet, has it? And once out onto the course, 2 riders away for most of the day so far. The Côte de Mayas, as Chavanel was first over there ahead of Patrice Algon and Santiago Botero. But then Algon fell back and left the other 2 to continue on the way onto the Côte de Bougar. That was at 35 kilometres, and this is Algan here. He's made his way up there in 3rd place. The win was taken by Chavanel and again Botero. Down to the first sprint of the day at Montrastrouc, 43 kilometres. They led the peloton here by just over a minute, and the 3rd place taken by Thor Hushoft, who's improving in that green jersey competition all of the time. And the last climb they've been over so far was another shallow climb of Castelbajic, 46 kilometres covered. Again, Chavanel taken all of the prizes so far today. He's the rider in red ahead of Botero. We're now arriving at the 75 kilometre point at Saron-Colin. And again, Chavanel Paul has taken the prize. He's given nothing at all to Santiago Botero on the day. Overall, the seconds still tell the tale, don't they? Jan Ullrich, 15 off yellow. Alexander Vinokourov, ever attacking, 18 seconds. Then we go to the rest. Heimo Zubeldia and then Tyler Hamilton here in 7th place. He's now 7 minutes back, but he's still riding in a top 10 finish. And Christophe Moreau, best Frenchman. Carlos Sastra's come into the top 10. Richard Veronk, because of his great attack yesterday, has come back into the fray. He's 11th, but a clear leader in the King of the Mountains. David Miller slipping away all of the time. Now, as we look at these pictures, I can tell you there's already been retirements. Marco Malaysi didn't start this morning, and I have to tell you very sadly that the American rider Freddie Rodriguez has just abandoned, along with Per Bertagnoli, both on the same Calderola team. So of the 198 we started with, 152 remain, and still 5 of the teams intact, which I think is quite a lot, Paul.
It is quite a lot, and one of those teams which is still intact is the US Postal Service team of Lance Armstrong. Ibernesto.com, the great Spanish team who we expect to see ride well on these roads today, as we're right over the border from Spain. Quick Step Davitamont is another team which is complete. And unfortunately yesterday, one of the teams that was complete, Lotto Domo, lost one of their men, Rick Verbrugge, along the road. And it is surprising how Lotto Domo have not really shone in this year's Tour de France. We expected them to be a lot better than they have been. And Robbie McEwen is battling to get himself the yellow jersey.
Looks like Richard Veronk here, gone back to his team car for an adjustment to his brake. Might have found it rubbing. A teammate you see waiting back within there, just in case he wants some help to pace it back up. It looks like Michael Rogers, in fact. And they'll get back. No, it's not. It's Cañada, David Cañada there. They'll help him back up to the pack, no doubt about that. I think we've still got Patrice Algon riding in between. Oh, sorry, Inigo Charot. In fact, we've caught up with him here. Here he is. Charot riding at about 3 minutes 10 behind the 2 leaders. And it's 5 minutes 15 at the minute, straight back to the peloton. Now, of course, those 2 leaders, one is 76th at 1 hour and 51 minutes behind Lance Armstrong. That's Botero, surprisingly enough. Chavanel, who's showing us now he is a talent of the future because he won everything today. 47th and an hour 21 behind in this Tour de France. So Lance is not going to unleash any anger on those. He is going to concentrate, if he can, on attacking the two riders nearest to him, we think on the last climb of the day, but maybe they'll launch an attack on the Tourmalet. So we're looking at the face here of Inigo Sherwen, and he's time trialing hopefully across to the two leaders, but it's going to be a tough call, I think. And no pedals being turned in anger yet back in the main field. But don't forget Lance Armstrong, rumoured today to be looking for an attack. But then Ulrich is also being rumoured to be about to do the same thing. We'll take a break anyway.
The 2003 Tour de France on
And welcome back. Yeah, the dirty washing's hanging out today in the towns around the Pyrenees. What a pretty sight here as the towns are putting on their best face for the passage of the Tour de France in the Pyrenees on the eve of the second rest day. US Postal riding in a position we're more accustomed to seeing them now, on the front of the bunch, and that is a good indicator to us that Lance Armstrong, there he is tucked in behind Floyd Landis, is now thinking of attacking. The boys sharing lunch at the moment as they pedal, and far from it quickly towards the Col du Tourmalet, a massive climb of almost 19 miles. This is Baden Cook at the back of the race here. It doesn't look too good actually, Baden Cook. He's had a rough ride through the Pyrenees. He leads in that green jersey competition, and he does want to win that. If he wins in Paris, he'll own the second Australian to do it. Anyway, while we look at the Tour de France, if you've never had 8,000s of bull snorting down your neck, well, experience the running of the bulls, which comes to you from Pamplona, and you can experience it from the comfort of your living room tonight on OLN at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. These are the two men of the day. They've been out front virtually the whole stage. They had people with them. They've got rid of them. Now the current lead is 3:40 over one chaser. Well, 3 minutes 40 over one chaser, Paul, but still moving clear of the field because that peloton slipped back now to 6 minutes and 20 seconds.
Well, now's when the real part of the course starts, because these riders have just turned onto the early slopes of the Col d'Aspin. It was interesting, the discussion we had in the car yesterday, because I remember this climb being categorized as a second category for many, many years, and this year it's earned itself the right to go up to first category. And I'm not quite sure why, because the mountain itself has always remained the same. But it is basically the footstep to the Col du Tourmalet. It's not as difficult as the Col du Tourmalet, and certainly not as long either, but it will set the legs of these bike riders on fire right now. It's 12.3 kilometers from the bottom to the top, with an average gradient of 6.4%.
Yes, it's a tough route today. It isn't the last day in the Pyrenees, by the way. That comes the day after the rest day tomorrow, but it is the toughest of remaining days in this year's Tour de France. And many riders who know their experience of the Tour de France know they must get up the Luz Ardiden climb amongst the leading group if they are to remain a challenger all the way to Paris. 13.4 kilometers that final climb, 7.6%, brings us up to 1,715 meters, and that's around about 5,400 feet. Well, there's the beautiful valleys. We've spent more time than usual down here in the Pyrenees. The Pyrenees mountain chain, most of the roads that go into the Pyrenees don't go anywhere. You come back down the same road. They go to ski stations. But the organiser this year has found a variety of routes which has utilised most of the roads down here.
Well, it's quite rare for the Tour de France to spend such a long length of time in the Pyrenean range. In fact, there are 4 mountain stages in the Pyrenees this year. There's still one more to come. Tomorrow is a rest day, but backed up after that is a stage which a lot of people need to pay attention to, because it is a very difficult stage on the road down into Bayonne. And although the 2 big mountains come very early on in the stage, they are quite difficult.
I must say, having driven past the base of the Col d'Aspin yesterday as we came away from the finish at Loudonville, the police had already posted sentries at the bottom and barried it off, so they were stopping already the cars going up this climb, and we might see quite a large crowd on it. They may have been making it a one-way passage, because they have to make sure with the mountains these days that they don't clog it up and can't get rid of the cars before the peloton arrives. There is a huge crowd watching the Tour de France this year, bigger than we've ever seen, and of course it is causing a lot of traffic problems whenever you're in the area of the Tour de France.
Bit strange, the tactics of Team Telecom this afternoon, because Santiago Botero has gone out on the attack. They've got about a 5-minute advantage over the main field. He's not a danger in the overall classification at all to Lance Armstrong, because he's almost 2 hours behind. And on a day like this, I think the weather conditions are actually going to tilt towards Armstrong, because the temperature has come down quite dramatically to about 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity is quite low at 37%. This is the face of the champion of Germany, Eric Zabel. His job today basically to try and look after his teammates, because they seriously believe they've got a good crack at winning the Tour de France this year with Alexander Vinokourov, who's in 3rd place, just 18 seconds off the lead.
Well, Eric Zabel actually is riding his 12th Tour de France, his 10th Tour de France. He's won 12 stages, and he has yet to win a stage this year. Indico Shower is yet to catch up with the 2 leaders. We'll take a break on OLN. Welcome back. We're looking down the valleys of the beautiful Pyrenees. A little bit of cloud around, but it's sort of a white mist rather than a threat of rain. But it does reduce visibility on the high mountains down to about 100 yards or so, but then it blows away again quite quickly. Well, we're looking at the peloton. They're in absolutely no hurry at all to get to the mountains. They're just about to start the Col d'Aspin here. It's Bobby Julich, the American cyclist, was the last rider to top this mountain in 1st place. That was 2 years ago, in the year 2001. At the moment, we still have 2 riders clear. They've been away virtually all day, Santiago Botero and Sylvain Chavanel. Chavanel has won all of the little 4th category climbs, and indeed the 2 special sprints. He hasn't shared any of the money with Santiago Botero. Inigo Charro is chasing, but I think chasing is the wrong word now. He's riding along and waiting to be caught, because he slipped back to 4.5 minutes, while the peloton are almost 8.
The peloton will begin a sensible acceleration once they get onto the first slopes of the climb. I'm not sure they'll begin too much of the war on the slopes of the Col d'Aspin. They will certainly wait for the next climb of the day, the Col du Tourmalet, which goes uphill for around about 17 kilometers. Its average grade is only 7.4%, but there are certain points of that climb that go up to 10% average grade. It's amazing to see how teams swing and change as we swing here into the foot of the Col d'Aspin. Yesterday, the front end of the main field was completely dominated by Team Bianchi. And today, it's all blue on the front end as Lance Armstrong has mustered his troops. To quote one of his former teammates, Frankie Andreu, he said, "Lance has got his fighting face on today." And I hope he has, because he certainly will need it on this final climb of the day.
We will find out. There's a nice piece of encouragement. The American flag flying and indicating the riders now turning into a headwind, not a very serious wind, as they start this 13-kilometer climb. The leaders, the 2 leaders, are probably around about 4.5 kilometers in front of the peloton now, so they've got only about 5.5 kilometers to climb of the Aspin. Start steady, nice tempo ride. It looks the way they're riding this. They're not ripping anybody's legs off. Now, over the years, we've used the Col d'Aspin. This is very much according to plan. They don't tend to attack on this climb. It's a very shallow climb in many respects, but they'll use it maybe just to thin out a few of the weaker riders from the back of the field.
Eric Zabel on the right-hand side, Jan Ulrich on the left-hand side. Former teammates in the light blue jersey. You can just see bobbing in and out there. Jan Ulrich riding up to the front end of the pack, as has been his rendezvous over the last couple of days. He is looking more and more like a dominator, and I wonder whether Armstrong has got that one final ride in his legs in this year's Tour de France to dominate the German and come out of this race this afternoon with an advantage up to around a minute over him, because I think that's what he needs to go into the final time trial of the Tour de France with a comfortable advantage.
4:26 the lead still over Charro, and it's now confirmed at 8 minutes over the main field. A little archway of flags from Spain. We saw those out yesterday on the road into Loudun-Viel. Looks like they've moved across the valley today. 8 kilometers still to climb. That's 5 miles of ascension left for those 2 leaders. The peloton are now on the Col d'Aspin, and they're not angry yet. But of course, the Col du Tourmalet is a different mountain. We'll take a break. Well, we're watching here as you come back to join us. Jan Ulrich, who has just stopped by the roadside on the climb of the Col d'Aspin. He stayed here an awful long time, probably the best part of 30 seconds right now. We thought it was a routine puncture. But as you can see now, it might be a little bit more serious. He's not got his wheel going, and he's ever so casual. The peloton continues to climb. The USA will not put on any pressure. They won't want to leave Ulrich behind because of a mechanical. They will just ride at the consistent pace here. So looking at the peloton now, Jan Ullrich is the rider who was stopped by the roadside. A very casual stop. He didn't seem to be any bother as we see the Lotto riders slip away from the pace here now. And this is Axel Merckx. He's looked bad all day, Paul, and you know Axel is not having a good tour. I'm afraid he's looking like a man who might not get to the finish today, as Jan Ullrich, with the help of his team, has pedalled ever so calmly back up to the race. No panic at all here. Steady progress. There's the peloton. As I say, the US Postal will not turn the screw tight when they know they have a man off the back because of a mechanical.
I don't think it was their tactic to turn the screws up on this climb anyway. It's just a question of getting over this one. They'll start to turn the pressure on when they begin the Col du Tourmalet, which is in about 30 kilometers from here. At the front there, I just saw Michael Bogert. I've not seen the yellow jersey of Armstrong, but I do believe he's riding in around 25th position for the moment. At the back there's Nick Gates on the right-hand side, the Australian rider, riding his first of Tour de France, and moving up through the cars with no panic at all on his face, the big German challenger Jan Ullrich.
Yes, this is a professional way to bring your man back to the bunch. Absolutely no panic, just pedaling nicely. There he is. And he has that lovely pedaling style. This is Nick Gates from the Lotto team. Now, Nick may be unhooking off the back, or he may be going back to try and give some encouragement to his teammate Axel Merckx.
Well, the man who's been riding fairly close to the back end of the group is number 141 from Lotto Domo as well, Robbie McEwen. He's had such a hard time in the mountains in this year's Tour de France, but somehow or another he seems to get himself inside the time limit on every occasion. That's just the job that the sprinters have to do on occasions like this. 4:38 to Inigo Sharrow and 8 minutes 40 back to the main field. On the front, this looks like Pavel Padrinos, the big Czech rider on the US Postal Service team, setting the tempo. Armstrong trying to use his teammates to the maximum on this afternoon stage. He'll try and keep all 9 men in the pack for as long as possible, but men like this man here, Padrinos, Ekimov and Victor Hugo Peña, will certainly disappear on the early slopes of the Col du Tourmalet. And I wonder how Roberto Heras is going to be today, because reputedly he in fact has got himself a little bout of bronchitis.
It seems to be spreading through the peloton, because that's also affected David Miller and also Robin McEwen in the early days of this year's tour. But as we look now at Sylvain Chavanel, as they pass that 5-kilometer board to the summit, and also Santiago Botero, the gaps are still there. They're still improving. It's now 8 minutes and 40 seconds plus, so they're almost 9 minutes ahead. They've had a good climb, continue to increase over the peloton, while Inigo Sharrow is riding more or less the same speed as these two. He's losing fractionally on them. 4 minutes and 38 seconds the gap to him. Here he is, spread out on the climb, but he's getting no closer at all.
Well, all he can do right now is get himself into a comfortable rhythm. He's 4:43 in arrears, and he will realize that the main field will begin to accelerate quite shortly. And as they do commence their acceleration, he'll get pulled back and brought back into the fold. But the two leaders are still holding a pretty sensible advantage over the main field, 8 minutes and 45 seconds. And let's not forget, it was at the end of a very long breakaway that Santiago Botero got his 2 stage wins in the Tour de France. In the year 2000, he won back in Briançon. That was on the other side of the French hexagon. That was in the Alps. And also he got himself a stage victory after a long breakaway last year at the summit of Les Deux Alpes.
Well, here come the flags of the regions of Spain here, I think, because there's an awful lot of Spanish cars around today. As we look at the peloton, just keeping its steady tempo on the climb, and no attacks yet. Well, we're looking now at the trouble to Ullrich, but it's all been repaired. He's back in the peloton, and we'll be back shortly. And welcome back. There's the Pyrenees at their best. A lovely sky. It's changing by the minute, so don't worry too much about what look like storm clouds, because they keep on blowing through, and I don't think we're going to see much rain, if any, today as the riders continue now halfway up the Col d'Aspin. There's the gap to the boys in blue, 9 minutes and 10 seconds, and they're showing that to Indigo Charot in third place on the road. 9-10, Paul. That main field have hardly excelled on this climb, but it's all to do with the fact they're not interested in the three riders up the road. They're just watching one another.
There'll be a big battle. These riders at the front in the breakaway situation right now, Botero and Chavanel, they're trying to win the individual stage this afternoon. Indigo Charot, well, he's unfortunately caught in no man's land. He's not going anywhere near catching the two men at the front, and he's not being picked up by the main field. So he will ride around about 100 kilometers or so today, stuck in the middle of nowhere. All he'll be doing is using an awful lot of energy. But the big match is in the main peloton this afternoon. Vinokourov, Ulrich and Armstrong are the big names that we have been talking about. Earlier on, Jan Ulrich had a serious problem at the side of the road. It was a rear wheel mechanical change, but he's ridden back up through the main field, and they just glimpsed a sight of his Celeste jersey of Team Bianchi in the first 10 or 15 places, so no problem at all for him.
No, and he didn't look as though he's panicking when he changed the wheel. He must have sat there for at least 30-40 seconds and then pedalled off. Interesting little fact you all might like to know, we're on stage 15 of the Tour de France, and the riders who have appeared in those daily escapes, they've added up all the time that they've been ahead of the peloton, and Frédéric Finot of the Jean de la Tour team has been out front for 359 kilometres during this year's Tour de France without the peloton around him. Paolo Bettini of Quick Step, he's the second best escaper of the Tour at 335 kilometres, and Richard Virenque, who's had a couple of good results, he was at 325 kilometres. Well, it's a crowded old highway, isn't it, on the climb of the Col d'Aspin today? The crowd is just about managing to hold their footing on the side of the road there. Remember that we've got two riders in the lead, Chavanel and Botero, and the gaps are opening up all of the time. And this, I think, but especially by somebody like Chavanel and Botero, they've gone off in the hope that they can get to the finishing line in the first two places. Won't be easy, because Paul and I both think that the climb of Luz Ardiden is harder than the climb of Alpe d'Huez.
It certainly is, and looking at the times of the climb back in 2001, the fastest man up there was obviously Roberto Laiseca, the winner of the stage on that occasion. But in fact, it took him 37 minutes to get up this last 13 kilometers. Armstrong was about 45 seconds behind him in 38.26, but Kivilev was a little further back in 39.40. And that was the man at the time who was fourth in the overall classification, and the great friend of Alexander Vinokourov, who passed away this year on the roads of Paris-Nice, on the stage into the town where he actually lived in Saint-Etienne. And I wonder if that will be something that will not go unnoticed by Alexander Vinokourov, because since that happened in Paris-Nice, he seems to have become a changed man, and he himself feels that on many occasions he's riding as if he's being assisted by his departed friend.
Well, that's what he says, and his young new family as well has learned him to appreciate life as well. It's been a very sad start to the Tour today, because the AG2R riders, the whole Tour had a minute's silence in respect to the professional Laurie Oos, because Laurie was killed on Sunday morning when he was hit by a drunken driver in his home country of Estonia. Now, he's very much a current top professional bike rider with the AG2R team. Not surprisingly, they were quite upset. He's ridden the Tour de France twice, and he finished it once back in 1997. Former champion of Estonia, who died on Sunday.
Very sad day for the team, and a very sad day for the family of professional cyclists, and they honoured his departure this morning with that minute of silence. But just going back to the statistics of the ascent of Luz Ardiden here, as we look into the face of Victor Hugo Peña. On that stage to the summit of Luz Ardiden, Phil, back in 2001, it was rather a surprise, because Alexander Vinokourov was 6 minutes behind Lance Armstrong at the summit. And I wonder if he's the same bike rider today as he was 2 years ago. I don't think so somehow.
No, you're absolutely right. You get an idea there, the steepness of the climb, but the boys have not hit it too hard today. That's why they're all still riding along together. So we're looking at the Tour de France on the Col d'Aspin, a mere stepping stone to the Col du Tourmalet. Watch out for this man. I think he's looking for trouble today. We'll take a break here on OLN. Welcome back as we again look out for another vantage point here high in the Pyrenees. The third day the riders have made contact with the high mountains of this southern chain here in France. riders dropping off the back all the time. Hans de Klerk, Nick Gates, Leon Van Bon, all from the Lotto team, have slipped off the back of the bunch on this climb. This is the rider on third place on the road, Inigo Charot. He's nearly 5 minutes behind Botero and Chavanel. Well, don't forget, it may be a rest day tomorrow for the riders, but OLN's exclusive tour coverage will continue with a recap of the most exciting moments from stages 11 through 15. Boy, have we got some hard decisions to make. Catch 3 hours of the race highlights from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, only, of course, on OLN. Well, we're looking here, a little bit of a word of advice here for the boys in the lead, saying keep going, guys. The main field is not chasing that hard and your gap is going up.
Well, that team manager there is not the #1 team manager, Jean-René Bernadotte, in the team car. In fact, it's Thierry Bricot. The overall team manager of this bike race is a great personality, and his name is Jean-René Bernadotte. He formed an amateur team many years ago called the Vendée U. It was based in the area of Nantes, where he comes from, and he slowly but surely built it up to become a professional team, and it existed in previous years as the Bonjour team, and it's now just recently changed its name to Brioche La Boulangère. But they've developed a very good team here, Phil. They've looked for French talent, and over the years they may well have brought themselves in the possibility of having a great new French champion. But the riders are facing today a very difficult stage. It's 159 kilometers, or just inside of 100 miles, down through Lannemezan at the start, and they are now on the first major climb of the day, the Col d'Aspin. But there are 2 very big climbs to go.
Yes, indeed, this is a very tough day because we know the attacks are going to come over those last 2 big climbs, and the Tourmalet has written itself into the annals of the Tour de France ever since it was first included in 1910. On that occasion, the organisation were said to be killers, because they said the riders wouldn't make it, they'd die on the slopes. And the first circuit of that route of that period in 1910 was actually called the Circle of the Dead Men, because they really thought the hills would kill them.
They are terrible, the Pyrenees, and I've always found them very strange mountains too, because climatic conditions can change so quickly, and it really is quite bizarre here sitting in the commentary position, because one moment it's sunny and the next moment, in fact, the clouds come in. But this year's route through the Pyrenees crosses 14 summits, which are in excess of 1,000 meters, which is in excess of 3,000 feet. And this man is enjoying the Tour de France now. This is Gilberto Simoni, the winner of the Giro d'Italia this year. And in fact, going into the rest day in Marseille, he was rumored to be going to abandon the Tour de France. And I bet after his win yesterday, he was pretty happy that he didn't climb off.
You bet your life. You see, your body changes, and if you can persuade your head to go with it, because these are battles mentally more than physically when the going gets tough in the Tour de France. We're now inside our last 1,000 kilometers to Paris, but there's still some obstacles which could affect the destiny of the result. Even though today we are climbing at a reasonably steady pace, you see guys going off the back all the time.
Those guys, that little group of 4 riders you just saw going off the back, in fact, was Bradley McGee and Baden Cook. The sprinters just trying to survive here this afternoon. The 2 leaders have an advantage of 4 minutes 58, but that's on the chaser Inigo Charot. And a little further back, it's 9 minutes and 25 seconds if they wanted to wait for the main field.
Well, Sylvain Chavanel has won every prize today, and I get the impression he's not going to give the Col d'Aspin away either to Botero. It's unusual. Once you make a friend for the day and you work together to keep the field at bay, you tend to share the prizes and the glory, of course. But to me, Sylvain Chavanel is out to win everything he can. He's won both of the sprints, and also the three small hills rather than mountains that we've been over this morning. But this is a mountain. And there's the Basque flag, and looking at the flag, and it looks as though the wind is getting up there. Now, this is a huge crowd here. I think they were only allowed to come up last night from one direction only, because the police closed one side of the mountain. But they found their way up as Chavanel takes the prize from Santiago Botero. He snatched the newspaper. It's quite chilly out on the mountains today, so that will go up inside his racing jersey and stop the wind getting through to his chest.
Around about 50 degrees Fahrenheit at the top of most of these climbs here this afternoon, but it's the chill factor on the descent that the riders are really worried about. Well, there's Botero starting off the descent.
Well, latest time checks, 4:58 to Sherwen and nearly 10 minutes to the main field. We'll certainly be back in time to see the peloton come over the top, and we'll take now another short break here. Ole, ole. Welcome back. We're looking down on a very, very casual peloton so far on today's mountainous stage of the Tour de France. 159 kilometers, almost exactly 100 miles today, the race, as we head down to Luz Ardiden, and the peloton poised to attack soon, I'm sure of that. You can almost feel the atmosphere around this peloton today, because the Aspan is not the mountain to attack on, not when you have the Col du Tourmalet lying just in front. Even at this speed, a number of riders are tailing off the back of the race. Names are coming at us thick and fast, and it's just steady tempo. This is not high-speed racing on this climb, so it just shows you there are indeed now a lot of tired cyclists in this year's Tour de France. The latest gap, which goes right back to the two leaders now on the peloton, is they've seen a board of 10 minutes. We're being told it's 9 minutes 40.
One of Jan Ullrich's teammates,
yes.
just dropping off the back here. This is Fabrizio Guidi. He's much more of a sprinter of the team, but all of these guys have got to keep themselves in tip-top condition and try and stay in the bike race. Have to stay inside of the elimination times, which is not easy on days like this. And this is Philippe Gaumont. He must have been yo-yoing, because he was reportedly off the back a few moments ago. And riders can recover on a climb like this if they don't push themselves too hard and try and stay in the main field for too long. Sometimes a rider will use not enough experience and try and hold on for an extra kilometer or so to the peloton and find that he bursts like a bubble. Well, if you just ride at your own tempo, very often you get into a decent rhythm, and then you're able to recover and then slowly accelerate at the speed that you dictate, not the speed that somebody's dictating to you.
Most important, the climbers can't stand it when other people try to tell them how quick to make the climb. Look at the crowd here now, which indicates we're approaching the summit. It's quite a while now since the two leaders went over the top. This is Inigo Sherwen. It's over 5 minutes, in fact, as they come up. So he's losing ground steadily all of the time. Our computer's saying 5:10, but as he comes up to the top, as you can see, it's going to be nearer 6. Over the top then for Sherwen at 5 minutes and 46 seconds, as he now makes his descent off the Tourmalet. Oh, I beg your pardon, off the Col d'Aspin.
Well, he's covered 94 kilometers of the stage so far, and it's an awful long way to go to the finish. In fact, 65 kilometers till he gets to the finish line. He'll have a chance of some respite on this descent, because the descent from the top of the Aspin down to the small town of Sainte Marie des Campins in the valley below is 13 kilometers, almost 9 miles of downhill.
Just looking at Botero here, boys, there's all this cycling. He looks a little bit rotund, really, a bit overweight, and yet he can't possibly be with all these miles he's ridden.
Well, he always has been rather strange in his body style. He's never looked like a climber, and he's never looked like a time trialist, but he is a great climber because he won the King of the Mountains at the Tour de France. And of course, he's a great time trialist because he's the reigning world champion in the individual time trial. And it looks as if our winner from yesterday is having a spot of bother. Gilberto Simoni at the back end of the main field right now.
Yes, he'd had his mind attuned to a win yesterday. He got that the hard way, nearly 200 kilometers in the breakaway, but he won in the end. You get some idea of the light mist which is whipping over the Pyrenees today. 1 minute you've got visibility of 50 miles, the next minute you're lucky to see your nose. It is changing as fast as that just now.
There's Robbie McEwen, just a couple of riders in front there, 141. Had a nasty little accident yesterday while he was sitting at the back end of the main field. I think that was basically just an indication of the fatigue that Robbie is trying to pull his body through at the moment. He was hoping to win the King of the Mountains, the King of the Sprints competition, I should say, for the second year in succession. But it's going to be a major battle between him and the man who leads that competition, Baden Cook.
Neither has scored for days in that competition, and the others were so far behind who have scored doesn't really matter. Apart from the steady approach of Thor Hushovd, who they both say could be a danger towards the end, because Thor has got 132 points, but he picked himself up 2 today, so he's got 130 now, and McEwen has 148. So you see, if Hushovd gets himself a stage win on the flatter roads, he could find himself up on the leaderboard in that competition. As far as the King of the Mountains go, though, and this is up to date at the moment, by the way, when I say that Veronk has got 300 points and Long Dufaux 163, with 137 gap between the two. I don't think Vironk is going to lose that competition.
You have to say that Richard Vironk is a very clever tactician, because the majority of those points that he got, Phil, were on 2 long breakaways on the mountain stages.
Which he's done before.
He's done before, and it's exactly the same way that Laurent Jalabert was able to win the King of the Mountains competition on 2 occasions. Long breakaways over the big mountain passes and getting a huge advantage and basically squashing all the opposition. Good to see there, just hovering in the middle. Occasionally you get a glimpse of the yellow jersey of Armstrong, riding attentively to the front end of the pack. I'd like to get a look at his face today and just see whether it is the big game day face, because Richard Vironk had a look at it right now. Vironk dancing out of the pedals. He doesn't really need to go for any points, but I think he will just for pride.
He is going to. Richard Vironk is going to take on the boys. Armstrong isn't going to bother, of course. Here comes the sprint for Christophe Moreau, but that only inspires Vironk to go faster. I don't think he gets on too well with Christophe Moreau. Every time he sees the Frenchman get in, he always tries a little bit harder. 9-12, Dufault is second, so he's still being challenged by Dufault, but slowly but surely Vironk is pulling away.
Well, I think Dufault would just be happy with second place. He's second in the overall standings of that competition right now, an awful long way behind Richard Vironk. Let's not forget they are pretty good buddies as well off the bike, and they used to race for exactly the same team, Team Festina. This is the bit of panic that happens at the back end of the main field in the final kilometre. Riders who are dropped with about a kilometre to go will take all kinds of risk to try and get themselves back into contact as they get to the summit of the climb. And this is one of my favourite bike riders here, Eric Zabel. We've just gone over a first category climb. Eric Zabel is supposed to be a sprinter, and there he is, still in contact with the pack.
Now, these guys should get back on no problem at all. If you're just joining us, just remind you that Fred Rodriguez, the American in the Tour, has given up today. He is out as we now continue to the 2 big climbs ahead in the Tour de France. We'll take a break.
And the clouds continue to roll in here in the Pyrenees. We are at the summit of Luz Ardiden, where the stage finish is. The finish line just a few yards away from us. And welcome back to OLN. I'm here with Bob Roll. It is time to get some insight from you on this important, very crucial stage.
Today is a crucial stage in the Tour de France. One thing that we've grown accustomed to and started to count on in cycling is that Lance Armstrong will attack at some point during a mountain stage. We haven't seen that so far this year. We've grown accustomed to the Belgians doing good in the classics. We've seen that. We've grown accustomed to the 2 Brits putting some meat on the bone for all of the pilgrims that pedal their bicycles around. We've seen plenty of that as well. And we've seen Lance Armstrong attack like a lunatic at some point during the mountains of the Tour de France, even if he didn't need to, for the pure fun of it. He's put in some huge attacks, and we love it when he does that. It's a sure sign of the apocalypse that is near, that Lance Armstrong has not put in one single major attack in the mountains of the Tour. I think primarily it's because he hasn't physiologically been able to do that. He's had some hard days on the Tour, a terrible time trial because of overheating and dehydration. So maybe finally today the day has come, and he needs to, if he wants to win this Tour, put in a huge attack during this stage to Luz Ardiden. The problem I think Lance is facing more than any other is how to improve on perfection. He's won 4 in a row. He's going for number 5, and today is the day. There's been so much hype coming up to this Tour de France for Lance to win 5 on the 100th anniversary. It all boils down to one day, one climb, Luz Ardiden.
Well, hopefully things are going his way today. I know the temperatures have dropped. You can see clouds behind us. They keep rolling through up here at the summit of Luz Ardiden. Hopefully that's going to help him out, at least with the cooler temperatures. We'll see what can happen for the rest of stage 15. 1 mountain down, 2 climbs to go. Let's get back to the action now with Phil and Paul.
Thanks, Kirsten. Bob, I'm just thinking how hard our crew worked this morning to put you in a position to show the beautiful Pyrenees behind you, and the fog rolls in. Now, that's not just, is it? We're looking here at the 3rd man on the road at the moment, Inigo Charot. And as you can see, he's losing time steadily, but he's not making a big effort. He's riding these mountains very sensibly. Over 6 minutes now to Charot, and he's just doing what he has to do. He knows he's missed the train as far as the 2 leaders are concerned, and he's wisely now just riding along at his own tempo and saving his energy for the big climbs to come.
Well, he needs to save his energy because there are 2 very big climbs to come, while the main field is still on the descent of the Col d'Aspin, and it's all control of the US Postal Service today. Armstrong this morning reputedly had on the face of the big game day. And I wonder if he will have when it comes down to the final climb of the day. I think the important thing for Lance Armstrong is to just try and get himself 45 or 50 seconds advantage over Jan Ullrich, to have a 1 minute buffer before we go into the final time trial. But he's not going to get rid of Jan Ullrich that easily. Ullrich has looked very fresh in the last few days in the mountains. The only disadvantage I can see for the big German is this is a very long climb up to Luz Ardiden here, 13.5 kilometers, but it is very steep, and it appears to me to be more interminable than the Alpe d'Huez.
It is. Lance has a real big job in his hands. He's got to, I think, prize open a few seconds. Every second is going to count for that last time trial next Saturday. And if he can't get a few seconds, it'll be a very nervous rider who goes down to the final time trial to face Jan Ullrich, having known what time he lost to him in the last time trial. As the first attack? No, just a little sprint off the front. Remember that Armstrong leads this race by just 15 seconds over Ullrich and 18 seconds over Vinokurov. The rest of the riders are more than 4 minutes behind, and so really those three riders have just got to watch one another on the final climb to the finish. I know that Vinokurov will attack, Paul. That man is full of fight, and this today will be a big attack of desperation. He's got to get time.
He needs to get time. He's dreaming of the yellow jersey. He's been dreaming about it for some time. In fact, he said to his team management, Walter Godefroot, the Belgian manager of Team Telecom, before the start of the tour, that he felt he could win this Tour de France, and he certainly will go down as the most aggressive of the serious contenders. Armstrong has controlled all of the attacks so far. We have not yet seen him go out and attack on one of the big mountain stages. I thought he was trying to set himself up for an attack on the slopes of the Alpe d'Huez, but it didn't materialize. But the job done by his teammates on that day on the slopes of the Alpe d'Huez gave him the lead and the advantage ahead of Jan Ullrich. And Ullrich is the one name that Armstrong keeps conjuring up. Ever since he began winning the Tour de France back in 1999, he has always said the man who has the most talent in the sport is Jan Ullrich, and he has always retained that respect from the big man from Germany.
A very wise man is Lance Armstrong, because Ullrich has shown us he is really back into his groove as far as the Tour goes, and he's looking for a podium finish. He's never finished lower than second ever in a Tour de France. That's an incredible record. Just that certain rides have popped along and robbed him. Otherwise, he would have been a six-time winner.
Yep. And if you cast your mind back to his first win, Phil, back in 1997, we actually said at the time, well, nobody's ever going to beat this man for the next 5 years. He is so brilliant. But unfortunately, it was not his physical abilities that were brought into question. It was more his mental abilities and his, I suppose you could put it down as an eating disorder as well, because he did have a big problem keeping his weight down in the winter. But at the front of the race, the man who is doing an excellent job right now is Santiago Botero. He's 5'9". He's from Medellin in Colombia. 159 pounds his weight, which is rather heavy for a climber, but he did finish 4th overall in the Tour de France last year, and he's won 3 stages in the Tour, 2 of them in the mountains and 1 of them in the time trial.
It was a good time trial. That was at Lorient, wasn't it?
It was at Lorient, a very good time trial, an 11-second beating of a man by the name of Lance Armstrong.
So the 2 riders still clear here now, and still no reaction from the peloton. They're hanging at around about 10 minutes, but wait for the changes. Once we're off the Col d'Aspin, we're starting the slopes of the Col du Tourmalet. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Pyrenees. Well, we're down on the valley roads now as the riders are bridging the gap from the Col d'Aspin to the giant Col du Tourmalet. It'll take us up to over 2,100 meters today, and I think we're going to see plenty of action once we get to those slopes. No change overall. We've got the 2 leaders, Botero and Chavanel. And then in no man's land, we've got Inigo Charot, and still hovering it just on 10 minutes behind, the Lance Armstrong peloton. Lance, of course, in his leader's yellow jersey, but he can't feel safe, and everybody is set now to attack the Col du Tourmalet. This is the lovely town of Santa Maria de Campon, which is where, by tradition, the Tourmalet starts. And here we go. It's the feeding station at the moment for the riders. And again, US Postal are taking command at the front of the bunch. And just off to the left there, we can see that yellowish jersey of Australian champion Stuart O'Grady, but the yellow jersey of Armstrong also at the front here and keeping himself out of trouble. So these are the riders taking on the food for the final assault of the big mountains today. So we'll leave them to have their lunch in solitude, and we'll check in our Infinity Accelerating the Future as we look at the young rider. And today we've chosen the Russian rider Evgeny Petrov. There's a lot of good young Russian riders now coming into the professional peloton. He's part of that young core that have gone to the iBenesto.com team. One of the youngest teams at this year's Tour. He's now 25 years of age, and Petrov is a very good rider. Had a tough ride in the Pyrenees yesterday, but he won what we call the Tour de l'Avenir, the race of the future, which has always been seen as a forerunner to the Tour de France. If you win the Tour de l'Avenir, then watch out as you develop as a likely winner of the Tour de France. He's still in the main field today, by the way, but look at this. No sign of Sylvain Chavanel. Now, I think he may well have been dropped here by the rider from France. But your guess is as good as mine. We'll find out in a moment. So we're looking at Botero Paul. He has now been dropped by Sylvain Chavanel by about 12. We didn't see the move, did we?
We never saw the move because we were just back looking at the main field, and it is rather interesting to see this move by Sylvain Chavanel, and it really puts into question the preparation of Santiago Botero for this year's Tour de France. He was given the freedom by the team to prepare his Tour de France as he wanted to, and the majority of it was spent racing in Colombia. And I think he may well have suffered from not taking part in all the races he was supposed to. He's now around about 15 seconds in arrears of Botero, of Chavanel, and very shortly he'll find himself getting picked up by the main field, because he didn't look to me like a man who's got lots of power left in those legs. The orange jerseys are coming to the front right now. This is the team of Euskaltel-Euskadi, the team from the Basque country. And there are so many orange jerseys out on the roads of the Tour de France this afternoon. It would appear as if everybody who feels that he is Basque has come out to witness this great race in an area which they feel is partly their own.
Yes, there'll be lots of Spanish supporters, no doubt about that, as the riders now have hit the Col du Tourmalet. At the bottom of these climbs, by the way, you see a big sign which will say the height, the length of the climb. The Col du Tourmalet, I think, is about 29 kilometers or something that you see down at the bottom where they begin the climb. So this is going to be an extremely tough end to today's stage. These riders have shown this route the greatest of respect down here, down in the far south of France, because they know what the last two climbs are like. They've allowed the runners to go off the front, 3 of them, but they'll pick them off as they go up towards the finish through the valleys. We've had a couple of small hills. We have gone over the top of the Col d'Aspin, which was contacted at 94 kilometers, and that started the stepping stones then as we're heading off across now. Once you're down the Col d'Aspin, you go into the lovely town of Santa Maria de Campon, and then you're onto the Col du Tourmalet. And once you're down the Col du Tourmalet, you swing into the town of Luz Saint-Sauveur, and that is the entry to Luz Ardiden. And boy, that's a toughie.
And then once you get into that nice little town, it's 13.5 kilometers to the summit, and that will not be a fact unknown by all of these bike riders. It's good to see Sylvain Chavanel has been able to bounce back, because he's had a hard time a couple of days ago, Phil, where he just could not stay in the main field. And this is a good sign for a man of the future, because to ride the Tour de France and be successful, you need to be able to have a bad day and bounce back and come out and fight again. And he's proving that he can do that today as he rides into a lone lead on this very legendary climb, the Col du Tourmalet, which in fact this is going to be the 73rd time that the Tour de France has been over the Tourmalet. It's one of the cols which has been crossed, I think, more than any other in the history of the Tour.
It was in the very first year, along with the old Bisque, the Perresourde and the Aspin, and the Soulot, I think, was also included that time. And we're now looking at the boys in orange. Here we go, Euskaltel-Euskadi. They've now decided to lift the tempo. The climbers are warming up to the occasion, because they know that the majority of the audience from now on will be Spanish, cheering them on. They expect a Spanish victory today. Roberto Laiseca got it when we came up in 2001, and that was a great result for him. He's won hardly any races, but he chooses the big ones, and they don't get much bigger than winning on top of Luz Ardiden.
Well, if this climb has been passed 73 times in the history of the Tour de France, the last man to go across here was in fact Sven Montgomery, who's a very good bike rider from Switzerland, but he's up in the Tour de France this year.
Well, he was for a while, about 5 days.
Not long.
He got kicked out, yeah.
Yeah, one of the Fassa Bortolo riders who pulled out early on. This is Brad McGee. I think Brad McGee's job here now at the Tour de France is to look after Baden Cook, because as soon as Baden Cook seems to be in difficulty, he just sits up and rides alongside him. I think he wants to encourage him, pace him, and keep him in the race over the next 2 very difficult climbs. And by the way, the man who holds the record for going across the summit of the Col du Tourmalet the most number of times is the Eagle of Toledo.
Federico Bahamonti.
Proper name, yeah. Great
Still,
bike rider.
I'm sure he'll be on the race. We haven't spotted him yet, but all the stars of the tours gone by who are still living have been invited to this centenary edition of the Tour de France, and we're meeting some very interesting characters. Well, the peloton is thinning out at the moment, as we've only just started at Col du Tourmalet. It's nothing like as hard as it's going to be, even though riders are going off the back and the Spanish are stepping on the gas now. We'll take a break on OLN. And welcome back. We're looking across the trees here in the Pyrenees, and we're seeking the riders who are now on the lower slopes of the giant Col du Tourmalet. Climb goes up to almost 7,000 feet. The tempo is now totally changed as they've started now to drip the way. This is Jakob Piel, the winner down in Marseille, who's now going off the back of the bunch. Well, Piel in trouble, and quite a lot of riders have gone off. Gilberto Simoni, the winner yesterday. Also, it looks like David Miller is there. Yes, David Miller also going off the back. And we just caught there Jakob Piel.
Well, Miller suffering from bronchitis, and you can see by the expression on his face there right now there is no power left in the engine room. All he can do is hope to survive on a day like this and wait for the antibiotics to kick in. And if they can kick in, it's quite remarkable how professional cyclists can bounce back. And if David Miller can bounce back, well, maybe he can come up with the performance in the final time trial, a fairly flat time trial of 49 kilometers from the small coastal town of Pornic to Nantes.
Yes, it's pan flat and a different type of time trial to the one we had the other day, to the Cap des Couvertes. Just on 6 miles still to climb, 10 kilometers for the rider in front, that is, and this is Sylvain Chavanel, and he could well be putting his name on the records of being the first man to top the Col du Tourmalet. He's got a very good gap yet. Still in second place is Santiago Botero. He has not slipped out of it at all. He's got his own rhythm and he's sticking with it, and wondering where the rest are. Well, they're still quite a long way behind.
Well, he's been caught out by this breakaway, and I'm not sure that it's a very intelligent breakaway from a tactical point of view. Tactically, over the last couple of days, US Postal have launched some very good moves. They've had 2 men involved in breakaway situations. The first was Chechu Rubiera on the day down to the Plateau de Bonastre, and yesterday with Manuel Beltran in the leading group, they had the advantage of 2 men who were highly placed in the overall classification, forcing the other teams to actually chase down the breakaway. But what's happening here is nobody's really interested in Santiago Botero because he's an awful long way back in the overall classification. But what is happening at the front end of the main field now is they are starting to hot up the tempo because they're thinking more about the stage victory themselves, but still the big men will mark themselves. Sad to see Roberto Heras here. He was well up in the top 10 for much of this Tour de France, but he's been involved in a couple of crashes, and right now he appears to be suffering from a bronchial infection, which many of these riders seem to have pulled on over the last couple of days. And there is another of Armstrong's teammates there, just going out of the back, Pavel Padronos. On the far side there is Servais Knaven, a former Dutch national champion and a winner of the great one-day classic Paris-Roubaix. They are the beginning of the formation of the second autobus. The first one went off pretty quickly with all the sprinters.
Well, I must say this is splitting up very, very quickly as we climb more than the 70th time up the Col du Tourmalet. We've had a stage finish up at the top there once, and in fact I was there, and quite a problem parking your car, I can assure you. That was when Jean-Pierre Donguillaume won, by the way. He works on the race now with as a publicity media for one of the sponsors of the Tour de France, so we do see him quite a lot.
Jean-Pierre is a great character. In fact, he won quite a number of stages in the Tour de France, and he was one of those bike riders who was maybe not the superb talent or the big engine of a man like Bernard Thévenet, but he was very clever when he got himself into a race-winning situation, and that proven by the fact that he was able to win at La Mongie. It was actually just before the summit, I think, the finish on that occasion. I wasn't there, but you were.
I was. almost, no, I think it was right on the summit, because I remember the terrible blockage getting around the last kilometre where the cable cars go over the top. I'm pretty certain it was on the summit. We had to go to La Mongie further down for all the press office and all the basic technical bits of the Tour de France, and that was another delay as well to get off the top of the mountain. Well, this man knows the road is quite clear for him. He'll have no such problems. This is the Tour de France, and it thinks of the riders first as he climbs steadily towards the summit. He's riding it sensibly. He's not killing himself, as he hasn't done up throughout the day. There is a chance he could get the stage, and I'll tell you, that would be an impossible result for the French. They would love him forever, but the Spanish might have other ideas, because the tempo riding here on the climb is becoming rather fast. Ralph Aldag had a great first day to Morzine in the Pyrenees. Now in more or less a little bit of bother. He's looking at us, and he's dropping back from the main field here. Look at the carnage here now, as this peloton seemingly is completely split asunder, and this is all due to fast tempo riding at the front. Some of the younger riders here who's slipping away too. This is Marion Harry, one of the young riders in the race, and the first time for him. First time he might have seen the Col du Tourmalet.
Well, it's the first time when he came to the start of the Tour de France we'd actually seen him at all this year. There are a lot of riders from US Postal slipping off the back. There was a quick glimpse there of Yaroslav Ekimov. But you have to say well done, Phil, to Brios-la-Boulangère, because they've been so very close over the last couple of days. Walter Benetton finished 5th on the stage yesterday, and for a man like Benetton to be up with the top kings in the mountains, I thought that was a fabulous performance. He almost caught back on the descent, but didn't quite make it, and finished 5th, around about 15 seconds in arrears. Yellow jersey there, right at the front end of the main peloton, Lance Armstrong, riding fairly comfortably, the pace being set by one of his teammates on the front, and then a whole host of riders from Team Bianchi in the light blue Celeste colour of Jan Ullrich's team. Ullrich feeling very... Look at this ride here by one of Armstrong's teammates. They never want to give up. They want to stay in contact for as long as possible. This is Yaroslav Ekimov, Olympic gold medalist. He won't give up at all. He knows that Armstrong needs him. He knows he needs to have men around him for as long as possible. Oldest man in the bike race, 37 years of age, a great character, and strangely enough, a couple of years ago, retiring from the sport, but deciding he couldn't give it up just yet, and he still had the power in his legs, so he came back.
Well, because the team cars are being called by now by the race referees, it means that these riders are dropping away from the peloton, because the team cars aren't allowed to fill gaps until there is sufficient room to do that. This is Pradera here. Mikel Pradera was in the early breakaway yesterday, and the team cars now moving up steadily but surely towards the main pack that's still together on the climb, and I suspect not too many. Michael Rogers there just slipping down through our camera lens from Canberra. He's the Australian. He's already going off the back. It's his first sighting of the Col du Tourmalet as well. As we go past Vladimir Karpits, there he is. He was the early leader of the white jersey competition and one of the new young Russian men riding on that iBenesto.com team. So he's got plenty of seasons ahead to get stronger on these climbs, and this is what it's like now when you try to hang on to the back of a peloton here in the Pyrenees, being driven by the star men of this race. And that, I think, today will be Telecom, US Postal, Euskadel Euskadi and Team Bianchi.
But they're starting the showdown as we look up to the heights of the Pyrenees here right now.
Looks as though it might have a little problem on the top of the Tourmalet there, Paul.
Well, we don't have to worry too much from a television point of view, because I was talking to the TV producer the other day, and he said if there's any problem at all with the helicopters, at the Tour de France they actually use a fixed-wing aeroplane which flies at 10,000 feet and basically just circles over the bike race, so we will always get pictures. They might go a little bit soft because of the fact that the plane is a long way above the bike race, but we will always get pictures. Fingers crossed that he was telling the truth.
Absolutely. This is Laurent Brochard. He's got the bands of an ex-world champion on his jersey there, just around his cuffs of his sleeves. And he won at Loudonville a few years ago now, I think end of the 90s. But that's where we went, of course, yesterday. And number 6 here is Floyd Landis. Well, I'm just a little bit concerned that the US Postal boys seem to be coming backwards rather early on this climb.
very quickly. A lot of these boys have been under serious stress over the last couple of days trying to stay in contact with the main field. But on a day like today, when we get to the final climb, if Armstrong has just got 2 men alongside him, I think he will feel quite comfortable. But the last few kilometers, it's a question of every man for himself. That's Andrea Perron on the far side, the man who finished 4th on the stage yesterday. And I was very surprised by his tactics, because if he'd had half a brain, he could have won the stage. And just let's remind ourselves of the profile there. You get a quite glimpse of what it is like. It's a very difficult day, almost 100 miles, the Col d'Aspin, and now we're on the early slopes of the Col du Tourmalet. But over the summit of that, it's downhill into the small town before we then get up to Luz Ardiden. And Luz Ardiden, although it's 13.4 kilometers and an average gradient of 7.6%, goes up to 1,715 meters, I still feel that it's one of the most difficult ascents of the Tour de France.
For the leader here, he's still facing just over 7 kilometers. Sylvain Chavanel, that's just under 5 miles to the summit of the Col du Tourmalet. About a minute back is this rider, Botero. So they're still first and second on the road, but they're now split apart. They might hang on if they're lucky as they go up to the top of the Col du Tourmalet. We could be in the mist there. We'll find out soon. Stay with us on ORN. And welcome back. We're looking at the face here, getting a little bit pained now, of Sylvain Chavanel, just turned 24 years of age, rather. And a rider now who is trying to make the top of the Col du Tourmalet first. That would be a big feather in the cap of this young Frenchman. He turned professional in the year 2000. In the middle of the pack and looking very comfortable, number 1, Lance Armstrong. Jan Ullrich riding not too far away from him now. Looks as though the pace is now beginning to turn a little bit naughty, because these are the first significant accelerations now coming from the peloton. And it's CSC who's launched an attack. I don't think it's Carlos Sastre. It's certainly not Tyler Hamilton. So we're looking to see the first attacks from CSC now. Might well be Peter Luttenberger, this.
Well, on the back there, it's definitely Christophe Moreau. He's been pretty aggressive over the last few days. He's the best Frenchman in the overall classification, and he's in fact climbed up to 9th. And
well, they've put Bettini in trouble here with this acceleration, which I find a little bit surprising, but he knows what's ahead for the day.
And Victor Hugo Peña, one of Lance Armstrong's
Peña also dropping back.
faithful lieutenants, he's popping off the back. Now, this is Iban Mayo, who's come across here from Euskaltel-Euskadi. He was looking for the move. He wanted somebody to start the action, and as soon as he saw his opportunity, he leapt out of the pack. He's over 4 minutes behind Lance Armstrong in the overall classification, and it looks as if it's Manuel Beltran in the blue jersey on the front, just picking up the tempo. I don't think they want any excitement just yet so early in the climb.
Well, here comes the peloton behind, so there is a reaction to bring them back rather quickly into the fold. Armstrong has taken a front line there now. He has moved right towards the front of the peloton. Life at the back. Bettini just about hooked up to the train again, but only just. As we now go by with our camera bike, you can see the gaps here forming in the peloton. That was the first serious acceleration we've had of the day from the pack, and you can see now it's hurt a lot of riders with that sudden acceleration. We're watching here now for the Celeste colours of Jan Ullrich, who's come right to the front, looking across at the Ibanez boys. Ullrich looks to see who's going to react. This is Moreau coming back from that little breakaway. He's had a great tour. He's riding the best I've ever seen him, to be honest, Paul.
Having a fabulous season. He's 9th in the overall classification. He's riding with pure confidence. But what I have appreciated in this man this year is he's actually gone out on the attack himself on a number of occasions. Ulrich's gone with Armstrong. Now look at this right now.
Oh, well,
I didn't expect this quite so early.
If they've gone at this time of day, what will happen by the end of it? Because we're only halfway up, 3/4 if you like, of the Col du Tourmalet. A huge turn of speed. Ullrich must have taken the decision to test Armstrong to his limits today and not wait for the last climb.
Well, 100 years the Tour de France has been around. We were expecting a big stage today, but if they're going to attack this far from the finish, we are looking at a legendary stage. This stage, and Armstrong is losing the wheel here. He's got to pick it up if he wants to stay with Jan Ullrich. Ullrich appears to have put Armstrong into difficulty already.
Well, that is amazing, but Armstrong was not expecting an attack so far. And we're waiting to see now. Here he is, Alexander Vinokurov, also caught on one guard there. The Ulrich attack has hurt him, and Alexander's going to have to get into rhythm now. Armstrong obviously went into the red zone. He's now riding with common sense. Ulrich knows he's got him against the wall, but he also, I think, is at the upper limits.
Unbelievable. This is incredible. I expected the battle to happen in the last 4 or 5 kilometers of Luz Ardiden, but I tell you what, Jan Ulrich was expecting that as well, so he decided to preempt the situation and go out and attack early. Armstrong, though, hasn't panicked at all right now. He's got into a very sensible rhythm. He's allowed the German 40 or 50 meters. If it starts to open up to a minute, then it will start to look very precarious. There's still a very long way to go. We've got 30 kilometers of climbing to go before the finish.
Well, we are looking at still a long, long, hard road to the summit, and it's far too early to panic, but this is a confident move. This is the sort of move that a couple of years ago Lance Armstrong would have made.
Well, it really is. It's a magnificent move. Armstrong in difficulty, but not panicking at all right now. Look at that. His hands in the middle of the handlebars, concentrating on keeping his rhythm and his tempo high. But his face, Phil, is not a face of a man in stress. He looks calm and collected. He's keeping his eye on the back wheel of Jan Ulrich, and I think slowly but surely he will be able to return to the shadows of the German. In that group behind, I can just see Moreau, I can see Mayo and Zubeldia, and I think I caught a glimpse there of a pink jersey, and that will be Alexander Vinokourov.
But the confidence of Jan Ulrich to go alone on the climb before the climb that ends the day. That is a confident man who believes in himself. I can't believe Armstrong expected an attack from Ulrich on the Col du Tourmalet. We expected a thinning out of the teams, but not an attack by this man, as he's gone clear now. And he started to pick off riders up front as well.
Indigo Sharrow is just there. This is a brilliant move by Jan Ulrich, because everyone was talking about the showdown on the slopes of the final climb of the day, Luz Ardiden. And this attack has caught out the climber from Kazakhstan. Alexander Vinokourov is in serious difficulty. This is La Mongie. And I think there's a crowd out today, Phil.
I think there is, Paul, and this is where we have had a stage finish in the past, and the rider first through it, still leading 1:38 his gap, but of course that's on Santiago Petero. Sylvain Chavanel will be unaware of the infight which has now started. There goes Indigo Sharrow, just been blown away by the top two men in the Tour de France. This is a great move by Lance. He sensed the slowing, he's regulated the speed, and he's got back to Jan Ulrich. But you know, almost visibly there, Jan Ulrich has gone faster again.
But look at Armstrong's face. This is not the face that was stressed in the Alps. This is the face of concentration. It's a face of a man determined to finish the job off. This was a brilliant move by Jan Ulrich, a long way from the summit of the Col du Tourmalet, a climb which from the bottom to the top is 17 kilometers in length. And I don't think Ulrich will be very happy to see the return of the yellow jersey. But what they've done is put into real stress this man in the pink jersey, Alexander Vinokourov, third in the overall classification. Everybody was expecting this man to be the dynamiter of the Pyrenees this afternoon. Well, it looks as if the tables have turned.
Well, he's not panicking, and that's very important. There's still a long way to go. This attack has been launched 40 kilometers from the finish today, 25 miles. Half of that at least is uphill. So he's gone very early. He's done it to try and break the wheel. Now Armstrong almost hooked up, but he's not there yet. And again, the pressure has gone on by Jan Ulrich. He's determined to break Armstrong.
What a great race, and we've got so far to go to the finish. Armstrong out of the saddle now, dancing away, trying to pull himself back up to the wheel of number 131. It's all crumpled up there, the number of Jan Ulrich. Ulrich looks over his shoulder. I can't believe it. He's launched 2 accelerations, and both time Armstrong has come back. He's now on the wheel of Ulrich, but they're doing serious damage to everybody else in the bike race, including the great Basque climbers Iban Mayo and Jaimar Zubeldia. But the man they probably want to get rid of was this man, Alexander Vinokourov. He was waiting to launch the attacks, but they preempted him.
Now he's just going to have to hope that they slow down up there just now, because they can't accelerate to catch them. Here's the face of the Terminator today, Jan Ulrich. He's really riding with some speed, and Armstrong has ridden well. Cool, calm, collected, maybe a little bit of panic, but I don't think so. He has ridden back up to the back wheel of Jan Ulrich. Ivan Basso into the thick of the action again, number 81. And the other rider who's there is Zubeldia. So I'm not too sure where Mayo is, but I think he must have dropped back.
Well, that's surprising because Mayo was one of the first riders to attack when they started the activities on the climb here of the Col du Tourmalet. This point here that we're going through just briefly there was on the way down. This is Armstrong.
Now, Armstrong has countered the move of Jan Ullrich. Ullrich looking over his shoulder constantly. He will hear Lance. He'll know exactly where he is. He'll listen for any rasping of the breath to see if he's got him on the edge of defeat or not. Armstrong is proving one thing this year. He's a fighter.
He is a real fighter and a true champion as well. Look at all the orange T-shirts at the side of the road there, the Basque supporters for Euskaltel Euskadi. Well, their man, Iban Mayo, is in a very difficult situation right now. He has been put into difficulty on the slopes of the Tourmalet.
Well, there's no doubt that this man is going to fly the French flag first over the top of the Col du Tourmalet. Tyler Hamilton has also come up towards the leaders. But watch this, because moments ago, Iban Mayo put in a fearsome acceleration. But Jan Ullrich, who was dictating the pace, sits there, pumps a little bit faster and gets on, as does Lance Armstrong. Now, this is Alexander Vinokourov, who has been attacked now by Tyler Hamilton, who is going away up front. Well, this really is a battle we didn't really expect on the Col du Tourmalet, not with the slopes of Luz Ardiden still to come. But the strong men of this year's race have again come out and forced the issue. Now, for the first time since he attacked, Jan Ullrich has dropped behind Lance Armstrong, and that might be ominous. There is the peaks. We're amongst those peaks before we get to the finish today. Don't forget this man, he's still climbing towards the top of the Col du Tourmalet. Sylvain Chavanel, he still has a good enough lead to top it and be the first Frenchman over there for a few years.
Don't forget that in second position is still Santiago Botero, caught in the middle of no man's land. We are looking today, though, Phil, at a huge battle which started very early on. And what that indicates to me is that Jan Ullrich, even though he's 15 seconds down on Armstrong in the overall classification, is not completely confident that he can win this bike race if it was to go down to the final time trial. He wants to see if Armstrong is in difficulty. He wants to see if Armstrong has got weaknesses. And that's why he's attacked early on, because he is worried about the final climb of the day.
But again, Armstrong has suffered his own private hell here, and he still answered the call of the attacks of Jan Ullrich. And now he's content to ride at the front of Ullrich. They've tamed Mayo as well. They put him back in the bunch. The flags of the United States running alongside Lance Armstrong. Well, status quo as they go up, and the two of them are working Alexander Vinokourov out of the real challenging position. This is Pelazzotti who's come up now. Georg Stocznik, the return of Pena. This group is reforming here. So that means not a good sign for Alexander Vinokourov, I don't think, because also getting up now is Chechu Rubiera. So a couple of the big boys from US Postal now in the second group on the road if Lance is to find himself in trouble. Could be important later.
There's Roberto Laiseca, 175 there from Euskaltel Euskadi. He's also a man who was thinking about a victory here again. He was the winner last time we came here in 2001. Iban Mayo went out a couple of times to try and attack these bike riders. But it's rather interesting, Phil, to look at the bicycle choice today of Jan Ullrich. He's got a machine there with very aerodynamic rims. And looking at those rims, I think he might have a problem on the descent, because the descent is very tricky and those rims are very rigid. This is Zubeldia coming back to the leading group now. I call them the leading group because they're the leading group of riders at the Tour de France. Maybe not on the stage, because that honour lies on the shoulders of Sylvain Chavanel.
And Botero, who will be well out of this one because they haven't caught him yet. He'll be seeing them on the way down or on the lower slopes of Luz Ardiden. I'm pretty sure of that, but this is a very, very compact group of climbers. As it's now working out, they're probably the four men we expected to see together, but it was a hard job to get them together.
And the one man who we expected to be the man who would be most aggressive on this climb today is the man who is in fact struggling at the rear of the race for the moment, Alexander Vinokourov, third in the overall classification, 18 seconds in arrears. But the Basques will be going absolutely ballistic because they've got their two men, their two heroes, who are fourth and fifth in the overall classification, moving up to the front. Iban Mayo and, of course, Jaime Zubeldia.
Well, they are both more than 4 minutes behind Armstrong and Ullrich. And they are looking for the stage victory because they are riding in front of the Basque people here in this region of France. They've come over the frontier from Spain. So I think the infight will continue between Armstrong and Ullrich. If those two attack, they may not counter the move unless they use those attacks to try and weaken each other. There's an 18-second spread over the first three riders in the Tour de France today, and now Vinokourov is losing ground. The last time check we got is 5 minutes 50 to the brilliant French young rider who's at the head of the race. Bottero is awash in between, and then this is the next group on the road.
You know, I do wonder if Armstrong has been suffering from a back problem since the start of the Tour de France here, as we see the face of anguish and pain here on Alexander Vinokourov. It is so easy to challenge and nibble away and get yourself a few seconds, but to come down and put in the big performance, well, you've got to be a special kind of character, and today he is really suffering because he can't stay in contact with this large group of riders, which are the helpers of riders like Jan Ullrich and, of course, Lance Armstrong. He's cracked.
He's cracked. The wheels are opening here. He's now praying for the summit as fast as possible because he has hit the wall here. Now he knows now he's going to have to not panic, hang on, because he still has a third place in offering in Paris, because the climbers are still 4 minutes behind him, and he's got to be aware of that. But remember that Tyler Hamilton caught him and left him. Tyler has to take nearly 7 minutes out of him before Paris to get a podium place at the moment. Yeah, it's all possible.
Well, Tyler's also got to think about trying to catch Mayo and Zubeldia, who are up the road in front of Hamilton, because they're 4 minutes in arrears. Hamilton has lost himself 7 minutes, and these men are already building on their advantage of Tyler Hamilton, who is behind them at the moment. Armstrong, brilliant ride by him today as we look at the man who's about to cross the summit of the Col du Tourmalet in first place.
Still a little way to go, Paul, but not a lot. Where those cars are is where the summit is. We might be back in the mist by then, but he's going to do it now. Sylvain Chavanel is going to take this race down to Luz Saint-Sauveur, which is where the climb starts up Luz Ardiden. Remember the chase over here a few years ago, Paul, when one Claudio Chiappucci was ahead in the yellow, and Greg LeMond did the descent of his life, caught him on the lower slopes of Luz Ardiden and wiped him out and became the race leader.
What a dramatic bike race that was. The Luz Ardiden has always provided a theatre of drama at the Tour de France, and I think we're going to witness that again here this afternoon. And by the way, at the summit of the Galibier, there's a special monument to Henri de Gréange, the creator of the Tour de France. At the Col de Izoard, there's a famous monument to Fausto Coppi and Louison Bobet. At the summit of this climb, there is also a monument to the man who for many, many years was the race director, Jacques Godet, who died back in 1986.
Yes, I think he did almost 60 Tours de France, that man. And what a gentleman he was, educated at Oxford.
Well, that's not a bad place.
Very nice English.
And the thing that always amazed me was the photographs of him dressed up in his safari suit when he came to the Tour de France,
with
including
his
the pith helmet.
Absolutely right, yeah.
Oh,
I was never sure which way he was going, because the pith helmet looks as though it's got a front on both ends, and he used to stand through the car roof backwards.
Vinokourov, look at this though. He is really suffering. You know, when you hit the wall in a bike race like this, you really go through all kinds of agony. And this man today was hoping to get to the foot of the last climb with these two men, Jan Ullrich and Lance Armstrong, and tickle away at the advantage that they had ahead of him. He thought the yellow jersey was in his grasp this afternoon, and that's probably why Jan Ullrich decided to go down and lay down the law very early on. Let's never forget that Ullrich and Vinokourov were teammates for many, many years, and they knew each other and their physical abilities very well indeed.
Well, here he is, Alexander, just riding his own pace now and losing a little bit of ground here. Still a long way to go to the summit of the Tourmalet. He'll have to descend with a lot of skill and a lot of nerve, I think, to try and shut down the gap before they hit the last climb. He shouldn't panic. I know he's under pressure, of course, by the climbers behind him, Zubeldia and Mayo, but they've got to finish 4 minutes ahead of him to claim a place over him on the overall classification.
Well, Armstrong's not very happy with these two Basque riders here at the back, 171, 179, Iban Mayo and Zubeldia. I've seen him a couple of times gesticulating at them, trying to say, well, come on, you guys, come and work at the front if you want to get the win at this bike race, because we've still got to catch Sylvain Chavanel.
Well, the Basque riders are being spotted there by the Basque spectators. They'll be shouted all the way up. They won't go anywhere near the front now until they've got to the bottom slopes of Luz Saint-Sauveur onto the final climb. That's where they'll attack, and that's where the other two will have to follow. Here is Alexander Vinokourov. Fight, fight, fight. He's paying dividends. He is coming back to that group.
Well, Sylvain Chavanel, he can ride a relaxed final 500 meters. He gets to summit here, and he will get himself a rather special prize of going
Paul,
over
this has been an incredible day out for this young man. He has won every prize on the road today. The hotspot sprints, all of the mountain climbs. The only one remaining now is the last one of the day. That'll be a big ask, but he can't say he hasn't given his heart to this stage.
He's still got to keep a fairly steady head on his shoulders right now, because he faces a long descent from the summit of the Col du Tourmalet down into Luz Saint-Sauveur. It's a descent of almost 20 kilometers. And I'll tell you one thing, when he gets to the bottom of that descent, his arms will be absolutely aching. He shouldn't lose any time on his advantage, because he should be able to keep an average speed of pretty close to 45 or 50 miles an hour on the descent, as we get confirmation of the time gap of Sylvain Chavanel to the Armstrong-Ulrich train here, 5 minutes and 6 seconds. And still caught in the middle, Santiago Botero of Colombia.
Yeah, he'll be next over the top of the Col. Well, those two riders are ahead of what is the real action of the Tour de France. This man never gives anything away, does he? They're on the way up the Col du Tourmalet. We'll see them over the top next on OLE. And welcome back. We are now approaching the top of the Col du Tourmalet with the finishing climb to come. Jan Ullrich, Lance Armstrong locked together in a battle for victory in the Tour de France. The two Spanish climbers, Zubeldia and Mayo, looking for the stage win, sit behind them. Well, as they're coming up, Paul, just over 3 minutes has gone by, so they have ridden so much quicker on this climb than the lone French leader.
Well, they are hammering. They are really battling it out. We expected a showdown on the final climb of the day. Well, we are certainly going to have a showdown there, but there are not going to be that many people in the game, because right now it's Ulrich and Armstrong. Armstrong, you look at his face. He is not in difficulty right now. He's in a very good day, and they've got the two Basque riders in there as well, Iban Mayo and, of course, Jaimar Zubeldia. And those two riders have got a very good chance of climbing up in the overall classification today, ahead of Alexander Vinokourov. And I read earlier in this afternoon the position of Alexander Vinokourov at the end of this stage in 2001. He finished almost 7 minutes behind the leaders, and that's probably in his mind right now. There's Hamilton, Morrow and Ivan Basso.
Hamilton's had a wonderful climb. He's come up to these riders, and he's also shed at Vinokourov. And Christophe Morrow, I've never seen him ride so well in the mountains. At last has come through as a real challenger in the Tour de France, and he's promised before, and he's finished up retiring from the race. He's not too far behind, about 4 minutes 35 seconds over the top of the climb. Armstrong going over alongside his arch enemy Jan Ullrich. The two climbers waiting to launch their attack when they get onto the slopes of Luz Ardiden. Here he comes now, and it looks to me as though Botero is looking for him. He's counting the riders through. And as we watch here, Georg Tocznik comes over the top, Denis Menchov, Carlos Sastre. Now, unfortunately, our cameras haven't gone back with Botero, but he'll find that Vinokourov has been tailed off here.
He's not even stayed in this group. Armstrong has two teammates in the group there, Chechu Ribiera and Manuel Beltran, but Alexander Vinokourov was not even able to stay on the tail of that group. They're in the cars right now. This is panic on board. He's got no energy left in his body. He needs to try and recuperate over the 20 kilometers downhill. But I tell you what, it's going to be purgatory for him on the slopes of Luz Ardiden, because, Phil, that climb is an absolute beast.
Yes, and the descent is not a clever one either. You've got to watch this descent on the early part of the Col du Tourmalet. Look at the drops off to the right there as you come down this mountain, and he's got to take chances because he's going over the top with time to make up here. There's the group he was left by. Botero will try and get him at least onto that. But dizzy, isn't it, when you follow this close on a motorbike with a camera? And the speeds they're reaching. We've gone back to the leader here, Sylvain Chavanel. He's got a lovely clear road, empty ahead of him. He's gone over the top with that lead of 4 minutes plus. But, you know, it was 5:46, and it's still coming down.
In fact, we're getting a quick time check that Vinokourov went 1 minute and 18 seconds behind. Well, Richard Virenque has built an unassailable lead, Phil, in the King of the Mountains competition. He now leads by 141 points. And you know what? There are only 135 points in the race. So as far as he's concerned, as long as he doesn't fall off between here and the Champs-Élysées, he's got this one in the bag.
It's a lovely feeling, isn't it, when the Pyrenees aren't even finished, because we have a couple of more big ones the day after tomorrow, but they come a little bit early on as we roll out onto the flat roads towards Bayonne. But there he is, the king of the mountains, comes over the top, no points. I think he's too far down the line today, even though it's an all category, outside category climb, the Col du Tourmalet. But 4 minutes was the gap to Ulrich and Armstrong, and on the descent, Chavanel has started to nudge it away again.
This is one of the riders from Euskaltel-Euskadi. He's in a bit of bother here on the rather
Doesn't actually
tricky.
like going downhill, does he? That's the Armstrong group. This guy, it's either Mayo or Zubeldia, but I think it's Mayo.
That's Armstrong in front there. He's the man setting the tempo on the front. Right on his wheel there, you can see the light blue jersey of Jan Ulrich.
He knows Ulrich hates descending.
And Ulrich, I think, has made a serious error in the choice of equipment this afternoon, because see, Armstrong opened up about 10 lengths in that corner there right now. Ulrich has got very deep carbon fiber rims on. They are very rigid, not flexible at all. And a couple of years ago, when he was actually leading the Tour de France, he put the same rims on, and we saw him almost lose contact with the group on a day in the eastern part of France when he was the leader. And it was a day of panic for him, and I'm surprised that he's opted for that choice this afternoon.
Well, perhaps he hasn't learned yet, Paul. Who knows? It looks like Mancebo coming up here. A little bit of a surprise if it is. He's riding up there with Nicolas Jalabert, who's done a very good ascension for him. Not that far down the line at all. George Hincapie, I think it was with him there for. He's also climbed pretty well up the Col du Tourmalet. Oh no, this is Lars Groschardt now, I can see him.
And it's Nicky Sorensen, the champion of Denmark, in the middle. Hincapie, what a brilliant bike rider. This is a big bike rider. He's not known for his climbing ability, but he's not too far off the leaders. And he's a man that Lance Armstrong has counted on many days throughout this Tour de France. 8.5 minutes for George Hincapie. And these mountains here are certainly a little bit taller than the ones in North Carolina where he lives these days.
Well, he's actually moved to Greenville now, which I think is in South Carolina, isn't it?
Yeah, Greenville, South Carolina, yeah. He used to live in Charlotte, but then he decided to move away from Charlotte, which he thought was a little bit too flat, and wanted to be just a little bit closer to the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Right, well, these boys are over the top. George Hincapie, never regarded as a big climber, has come over very well there. Now starting to freewheel down, chance for a respite. Back to the leader, getting into his streamline position, then sits up quickly to just touch the brake. He's running now away from the Col du Tourmalet as he now sees the first time. It's 25 kilometers still to go, which would be very nice if we were racing to the valley to finish, but we're not, of course.
This is spot of bother here for one of the riders from Euskaltel-Euskadi. I think, in fact, it's Zubeldia at the back who's having difficulty. Mayo is still in contact there, and it's Armstrong setting the majority of the pacemaking, while here at the back we're looking at Botero in first position, and in second position Alexander Vinokourov, and they are still trying to catch the group in front of them, which is a minute behind Armstrong.
Well, it really is a dizzy old descent, isn't it? And Botero still trying to coax Vinokourov up to this leading group. All right, well, here's a Camelback trivia question for you as we go to the break. Now, I don't know what it is, so let's have a look. How much prize money was awarded to Maurice Garin when he won the Tour in 1903? Well, I think I know the answer. It would buy him a pack of cigarettes these days, and he was a smoker. We'll tell you the answer after the break. And welcome back. Here's the answer to our Camelback Tour trivia. The question was, how much prize money was awarded to Maurice Garin when he won the Tour in 1903? 3,000 French francs. And that'll be about 300 euros, I think, now, because they speak in a different monetary language. But that was all back in 1903. $250,000 for the winner now. We're back with the riders now in the Tour de France. And this is Moreau, who's trying to patch up, and also Vinokourov in trouble ahead of them. Well, here is Botero. He's now finally got it together with Alexander Vinokourov as they come off the descent of the Col du Tourmalet. He's brought them up to that group. A big effort now to get him back on the bunch. But the fact that they really haven't made a lot of progress here, he is still in big trouble. But look at this, straight through on the back wheel of Santiago Botero. This is the man still currently third overall. And Botero, as they're saying, you can't just sit with these guys, you need to move on. So he's taking him through.
And he took a few risks trying to get him to the front of the main field there right now. Now, what Vinokourov, you see Vinokourov shaking his legs there. He's got a serious problem, built up a lot of lactic acid in those muscles. What he needs to do right now, because he's probably looking at about 45 to 50 minutes of racing as we look at the change in the climatic conditions at the top of the Tourmalet. The clouds have certainly come down. Floyd Land is coming over the summit there. Very sensible. getting his jacket on for the long and cold descent, a 20-kilometer, 12-mile descent. To go back to what I was just saying, Phil, about Alexander Vinokourov, he needs to get on board a lot of fast sugars right now. It doesn't really matter if he gets his blood sugar content up very quickly, because he's only got about 45 or 50 minutes of racing, and if he can do that, he might just survive and come back on the slopes of Luz Ardiden, but it's a big, tall question for him to do that.
Well, Sylvain Chavanel is actually dreaming of winning the stage here. He's won everything else on the day. This is Jan Ullrich saying to the two Spanish riders, come and do some work if you're going to stay with us. Come and make some of the pace at the top. But he knows, like we know, they are waiting till the big climb and they're going to attack him.
They will certainly attack him. There's going to be a big attack on the final climb up to Luz Ardiden between Ullrich, Armstrong, Mayo and Zubeldia. This man, all he has to do right now is try and get down this mountain as quickly as possible. They shouldn't really eat that much into his advantage, because he is probably descending at around about the same speed as they are. He's currently holding on to around about 4.5 minutes over the Armstrong-Ullrich group, and getting down into that low aerodynamic position he was in a few moments ago, he'll be able to pick the pace up to pretty close to 80-85 kilometers an hour.
Well, Armstrong there, just taking a bit of time out now. The race is now moving its next battleground to Luz Ardiden. They know that the two Spanish riders will attack. They can afford to give them a couple of minutes on the climb if they have to continue their infighting, because they are 4 minutes behind overall, both of them almost identical timings at 4:16 and 4:37.
There's only about 100 meters between this group, Christophe Moreau, Tyler Hamilton just going into first place there, and Ivan Basso behind the Jan Ullrich. There they are. In fact, they're less than 100 meters.
Yeah.
They're going to get back into the group of Armstrong-Ullrich.
That will confuse the tactics when they come across the village of Saint-Sauveur onto the slopes of Luz Ardiden. There'll be a huge crowd in the town. It's a lovely town, nestles right at the foot of the climb up to the top of the ski resort. And this is the rider who's in the town now, and he's deserving all of the applause. Listen to the crowd. They've waited here all day to see this, and a Frenchman taking the tour towards Luz Ardiden.
Well, he's going to have to put in a very special performance to keep his 4 minutes and 35-second advantage over the group of Lance Armstrong, Jan Ullrich, Jaime Zubeldia, and of course Iban Mayo, which very shortly is going to be strengthened by Moreau, Hamilton, Basso. And in fact, we're now getting a time check through that the group of Alexander Vinokourov is 1 minute and 23 seconds behind the group of Lance Armstrong. And I can see that Alexander Vinokourov is going to slip away from the top 3 position that he's been holding since a couple of days, because I have a funny feeling that the two riders from Euskaltel-Euskadi are really going to put the hammer down on this final climb of the day.
The infighting will automatically pull them clear, I think. There's the threesome caught the foursome. And now we've got Christophe Moreau, Ivan Basso. They've joined up as well. And now you see they're all checking out who has come up to them there at 15 kilometers to go for the leader. He is just about to start the climb now as he leaves the town. It kicks straight away up. Latest time checks, 4:35 to the group Maillot Jaune of Armstrong. And that's the important group right now. Alexander Vinokourov add on another minute plus to that. And that is really curtains for him, I think, as a challenger for victory in the Tour de France. Come back as we begin the big assault to the finish. Right here on OLN, don't miss a pedal stroke. And welcome back, still ahead, a commercial-free half hour to come. But right now, the riders tackling their last mountain top finish of this year's Tour de France. We now have 8 riders formed in this group. Tyler Hamilton, here he is, has also got into the thick of the action alongside Armstrong. Well, Hamilton there took a little look at Lance Armstrong. Armstrong just never showed any emotion. Remember, they're good friends, but they're on rival teams now. And we have 8 riders, just to remind you: Zubeldia, Armstrong, Mayo, Moreau, Basso, Hamilton, Ullrich. 7 riders, not 8 as I said, chasing Sylvain Chavanel.
Well, you know, this is a very complicated situation right now for Lance Armstrong. It was easier before when there was just himself, Ullrich, and the 2 Basque riders here, Iban Mayo and Jaime Zubeldia. Now you've got thrown into that mix Tyler Hamilton, Christophe Moreau and Ivan Basso, but I think all of the same we're going to see a move come from the two riders in the orange jersey, because they have got so many supporters out here on the slopes of this climb. They want to do something very, very special, but they've still got to catch as Luz welcomes Le Tour with a little sign there to show that they're in love with the Tour de France, which has been coming here since 1985. The battle will be done, I'm sure, by the Basque riders. They haven't done a lot in the breakaway. They didn't do a lot when there was just Armstrong and Ulrich with them, and they will be waiting. The important thing is to see which one of these men goes out on the attack, and everybody says the strongest of the two is Jaimar Zubeldia. The most talented of the two is Iban Mayo.
Well, I think both of them will try and attack, given the chance. This is the town of Luz Saint-Sauveur, the gateway. This is the chase group. It should contain Vinokourov, who is losing not his third place yet, but certainly his chance of challenging for the victory in Paris today. And frankly, as we start the last few kilometres of the stage, that's the only decision made so far. And it's still a very steep climb up to the finish. The Frenchman, Sylvain Chavanel, has been away since the start of the race today. He's won every prize out on the course and is now going for the ultimate one, the finish line itself. The conditions at the top of the mountain right now have changed somewhat from earlier today, when we were bathed in lovely sunshine and clear visibility. The same mist which has come over the top of the Col du Tourmalet in the last 20 minutes is now moved over the valley and is on top of us as well. Here's the group, Christophe Moreau. Now this is a nervous few moments at the bottom of this long climb. Armstrong has put himself in a position to keep an eye on everybody. Ulrich has dropped back a little bit, maybe to accelerate.
Well, the attacks will come. I feel the serious attacks will come towards the summit of the climb. Armstrong still has a buffer of 15 seconds over Jan Ulrich, but the 18 seconds he started ahead of Alexander Vinokourov today will be completely changed tonight. The other two men, Zubeldia and Mayo, are 4 minutes behind Armstrong in the overall classification, and also around about 4 minutes behind Alexander Vinokourov for a podium place, but they could get it today. Botero's done his job and he's gone to the back of the main field, and I don't think he's got that much more left in his legs right now.
Well, that's Botero done for. He can't do any more now to help Alexander Vinokourov. He's got to do it for himself now on the climb. It looks like Patrice Algant there, sitting at the tail. Now, there is Alexander Vinokourov. No choice now but to work at the front. He's still got just one little teammate helping him there. And it looked like Guerini, the man who won the stage up to Alpe d'Huez. And Guerini's not a bad pacemaker. He could get him up here, but I'm not sure how much firepower is left in the legs of Vinokourov.
Oh, look at the face there. The pain in this man's legs right now is screaming out at him to say, please stop. Please don't do this to my body anymore. But he knows he has to. He knows he has to try and reduce the gap from between him and the 7 men up the road who contain the big heads of state of the Tour de France right now. This may well be the reason that Jan Ulrich decided he wanted to go. In fact, there's been an attack here at the foot of the climb. Iban Mayo has gone, and so has Ivan Basso.
Well, there is a reaction, because I think they're hoping this attack might split the big duo up as well, because they could allow these two a little bit of time. They're not going to damage them. They could just go for the stage win, but that's the first sortie, I think. Basso and Mayo have just had the first little sortie, all neutralised. Everybody ready for it. Watch out for the next one. Armstrong calling for his team car.
They're not actually on the start of the climb yet either. That was just a slight incline before they get to the foot of this final climb of the day, Luz Ardiden. Look at this. Hats off, boys. It really is amazing.
Day, this, isn't it?
It just goes to show what they think about the helmet rule, because as soon as they get the possibility, they want to get those helmets off their heads, especially on an uphill finish. Just to qualify the rule, nowadays you're allowed to take your helmet off on a finishing climb which exceeds 5 kilometers in length.
Well, here we go now. It's everybody ready for the climb. They're all stripped down and ready to go. Now, who's going to win the Tour de France? It might be decided in the next half hour, and that will be commercial free. Welcome back to the Tour de France. We are just starting the climb to the finishing line of Luz Ardiden, and literally moments ago Alexander Vinokourov and a mass of riders have rejoined the side of Ulrich and Armstrong, and here now Ulrich has sent his man to the front again. Well, there is Alexander Vinokurov, about 4 men back. He's almost up alongside the shoulder of the yellow jersey of Lance Armstrong. The big three in this year's Tour de France, covered by only 18 seconds, start the climb to the finish on this huge, huge day all together. The Plaza here is the teammate being used by Ulrich. He's probably the only one he's got to make the pace, and there's others willing to help now. This is an amazing start to the last few kilometres. We're just 11 kilometres from the summit. It is all hard, all uphill. 2 years ago, Ulrich and Armstrong shook hands at the top and crossed the line together. There'll be no shaking of hands today, and if either gets their way, there'll be no crossing the line together either.
And if they do cross the line together, they'll still be separated by just 15 seconds in the overall classification. And that would go down to the time trial, which would be probably one of the most dramatic time trials the Tour de France has seen since the great race between Laurent Fignon and Greg LeMond back in 1989.
And I think it will be much closer than that, almost, Claude. There's nearly a minute between the two on that occasion. It will be a nail-biter. But the team Bianchi, only David Plaza, I think, is here now to help him out. He's just come back with Alexander Vinokurov and all the others. But they continue to climb. Very good tempo. We can't quite see at the back of the race right now, that I can tell you the race referees are screaming their heads off at everybody near the riders. They know the importance of this last climb, and they don't want it to affect the riders in any way falsely.
Tactically, this has swung back round to the advantage of Mr. Armstrong, because he's got two very good teammates in the group. Manuel Beltran, who's been superb. Beltran, in fact, is high up in the overall classification, but he will work for his team leader, Armstrong. He's 14th at the start of the day, and Chechu Rubiera is in there with him as well. But there's 10 kilometres to go to the summit here for Sylvain Chavanel, who we seem to forget about, Phil, who's ploughing a lone furrow 5.5 minutes up the road.
Well, he had his 24th birthday just 6 days before the Tour de France began. And this man is having the ride of his life. And frankly, I would not like to see him caught now, because he has ridden from the front over a massive mountain chain today, and he's won every prize on the road. Took a big gamble to go so soon on the Tourmalet alone, but he did, and now he's in the last 10 kilometres of the climb. David Plaza still setting the pace on the front. It's interesting, this, Paul, because now the big two, having neutralised each other on the Tourmalet, are leaving a move late.
They're going to have to move very late. I think the best move would come in the last 5 or 6 kilometres of the climb, because that's where you get the advantage of seriously opening up the time gaps. Chaos at the back.
Here, because nobody comes. This is the problem. What do you do with your crash helmet when you can take it off?
Especially when you don't want it. It's absolute chaos at the back there. Everyone wanted to get themselves as light as possible for the climb, even though the temperature is the coolest that we've had in the Tour de France so far, at about 22 degrees Celsius, well around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. These guys want to get rid of everything. They want to ride the climbs as light as possible, and they certainly don't want to have that helmet on their heads.
Pelozzotti's having the ride of his life, as well as the little Italian there gets through on the inside and moves up. He wants to keep in this. There could be a little surprise coming from him. He was Italy's best young rider not so long ago in 2001. He's had a 9th in the Giro d'Italia this year. He hasn't won a race this year, mind you. Now he's riding his first Tour de France. But remember that the last time the Tour finished in Luz Ardiden, it was 2 years ago. Ulrich and Armstrong were locked together, and Ulrich offered Lance his hand because he acknowledged he'd won the Tour de France. And Robert Lyseca, who's not very far behind, in fact, he should be in this group now.
He should have reintegrated this.
Yeah, won the stage then.
But on that occasion, it was slightly different, because Armstrong had a very nice, comfortable advantage over Jan Ullrich in the overall classification. Yeah. Armstrong didn't need to attack. It was Ullrich to attack if he wanted to win the Tour de France. It's basically Ullrich to attack if he wants to win the Tour de France here as well. But I think Armstrong is riding fairly well. He's controlled all the accelerations. He's always been at the front. I'm a bit worried about the fact that he's been climbing out of the saddle on a number of occasions, indicating he may still be suffering from a slight back problem from that early crash he had in
concerned, Paul, because we've only got a 15-second gap, and we saw how Ullrich accelerated on the Tourmalet, and Armstrong couldn't close it. If he leaves his move till late, he could take 15 to 20 seconds, get the win bonus, and he would take the yellow jersey, and it would reverse the standings, possibly in favour of a win for Ullrich.
could go either way or the other. It's been discussed inside out, I think, over the last 3 days by everybody. The Germans believe that Ulrich's going to do it. The Americans and the English speakers believe that Armstrong is going to do it. Well, nobody will know until we get to the final 5Ks or so. Armstrong is completely confident. I think he looks pretty good this afternoon. When he gets out of the saddle, he looks comfortable, he looks easy. You look at the position of all these other guys behind him. They're all groveling to stay in contact with this very elite group.
4:38 is the gap from Chavanel to these riders, and it's going to be tight. Chavanel has just 9 kilometers left to climb to the summit. He's holding his lead, really. They're not coming up on him just yet. Denis Menchov here, and there's been an attack by Mayo. There it is, as he makes his move, and look who goes, Armstrong, and look who follows, Jan Ullrich, but not as sprightly.
Not as sprightly. The big thing about Armstrong, he has the acceleration. When he wants to go on the climb, he can do it. He has now decided, I want to go. You can see the yellow jersey is opening up a slight advantage. Mayo now has to dig deep. Ullrich has got the big gear going. He's coming up to the wheel of the Basque rider, but Armstrong wants to go right now.
Armstrong was waiting for somebody to pull in the flag, and now it was even. What's happened down? What has happened there? It seemed quite a normal corner. He must have hit somebody in the audience. Mayo has gone. Now the situation. Remember the pair of sword when Ullrich crashed? Armstrong waited, but what? Let's have a look at this now. I still is unclear here exactly what happened.
I can't see. I think he just touched somebody with his handlebar there, but his chain is off. His chain is stuck, and it's complete and utter chaos at the back end of the bike race. Can he recover? He's on his same bicycle. His teammate is there right now. He's changed up onto the gear to try and get himself. He's got a teammate there. There is Chechu Ribiera. Calm down. Don't panic, Lance. He's saying, he's putting his hand down and saying, don't worry, we can get back into this.
The adrenaline will be pumping now like you will not believe here. He's got to control it, otherwise he'll take himself over the top. He's so lucky to have a teammate, and I think he's waiting.
Well, Ullrich is now in first place. I can't believe he will take advantage of this. He's looking over his shoulders. He knows there's a possibility of winning the Tour de France right now, but he's not sure what's happening. There is Vinokourov in front. There is Iban Mayo. He's the man who went down with Armstrong as well.
What is going on?
There's a problem with his pedals. He has a problem with his pedals.
This is what happened. I think his pedal may have broken. This happened. He didn't hit anybody. Well, it was the problem with his pedals.
It was very strange to see that. He's looking down. He now knows he's got a serious problem. Watch this now.
Well, this is awful.
Digging deep, and his foot has just come out, and I don't believe how he's managed to keep it upright there.
And how did Mayo? Must have panicked as well there. Well, what is this Tour de France going to end with? Every day is something different. Ullrich will be totally unaware and probably totally perplexed as to why Armstrong fell, but I think that is positive proof that it was nothing to do with the spectators.
He is not far behind. He's in the cars there, just behind Jan Ullrich.
Ullrich is not pushing it on. Hamilton here, speaking with Basso, saying slow it down a bit.
This is unbelievable. They are waiting for the man in the yellow jersey, and he's come back. He's still going to have that mechanical problem. He's going to need to change his machine because his pedal has come out on 2 occasions. Look at the burn on his back there where he went down very sharply indeed as another move comes. This is Iban Mayo now, has seen the yellow jersey back in the group, and he puts the pressure on once more.
Well, twice now we have seen problems here for Lance Armstrong. Clearly his right pedal. We've seen pedal problems before in big races, but what a day and a place to have a pedal problem. Ullrich did not want to push his advantage. Hamilton spoke with the others, but really, it's nothing to do with them. They want to win the Tour.
Let me cast your mind back, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but there was on a mountain like this where Jan Ullrich had a flat tyre at the bottom of the climb. He was a challenger, I think, to Lance Armstrong at the time, and he actually waited. Armstrong waited for Jan Ullrich to get back into the race situation. You know, in the sport of professional cycling, there's always payback time. You can never burn your bridges. Don't ever make enemies.
Well, that's absolutely true, of course. Ullrich wants to win this Tour de France more than anybody else, and probably certainly as much as Lance Armstrong wants to win it. But how lucky was Armstrong to have Ribiera alongside him to help him out of that mess, and this drama enacting on one of the steepest climbs of the Tour de France. They are now climbing steadily. They've brought themselves in. They're composing, but Lance now will be feared to get out of the pedal. He won't be pushing down on that right leg too hard in case whatever is happening happens again. It must be his cleat somehow twisting out the fitting.
But the faithful Chechu Ribiera is always there. Armstrong is out of the saddle again. He's jumping onto the tail here of Iban Mayo.
Here he goes again.
But you know, thinking back to that crash, I think and he's going again, he's accelerating again, Phil. This is amazing. This man has been on the ground. He almost lost his manhood on the crossbars a few moments ago, and he's decided he wants to go.
9 kilometres to go to the summit. The leader is just on 7.5 kilometres from the summit. And don't forget, Sylvain Chavanel is doing the ride of his life. But even though he's French, our French hosts with the cameras know that this is the battle for the winner of the Tour de France. And what a race this is. Lance Armstrong now, the adrenaline still pumping from his double accident, and Ulrich has gone on the defensive completely. Here he comes.
This is fabulous. This is unbelievable. The man was on the ground. He's had problems with his pedal, and he's now decided to go out onto the attack and put Ulrich onto the defensive. Ulrich now has to try and get into a rhythm so he doesn't lose too much time on the yellow jersey of Armstrong. He wanted to do something very special this afternoon, and I wonder what the problem was with his pedal. It could just have been slight nervousness, because I think the crash was formed when he just clipped his arm on the right-hand side. There was a spectator looking the opposite way. Armstrong just touched him, and he went down, and his front wheel was taken from underneath him. Well, let's have a look at the picture tonight, because what's happening at the moment is the drama of Armstrong riding away with the bike race. There you can see, this is Alexander Vinokourov. He has got the pink jersey on his shoulders, but that is of Team Telecom, not as of leader of the Giro d'Italia. Right now, this man is trying to stay in a podium position for the moment. The drama, though, is at the front of the bike race. Look at the blood on Armstrong's left arm there. He went down very hard indeed. He didn't have time to even control that crash because his front wheel just flipped around and he went right over the top. But he's bounced back and he's put the big German into difficulty.
Well, it is unbelievable, but now Ulrich, who was on the attack on the Tourmalet, is now on the reverse here on Luz Ardiden. Armstrong has just doubled his lead in the Tour de France. He was 15 seconds ahead overall. He's now 30. But Ulrich knows he's got to monitor that attack. This race is not going to end on Luz Ardiden today, because Ulrich will go to the time trial, maybe with 30 or 40 seconds deficit. He can possibly reverse that in the last time trial in Paris. That's what he's thinking right now. Here is Lance Armstrong. Now, we have had the privilege of having a look at the slow-motion replay of the situation. It looks, Paul, as though Armstrong did hit the spectators, you said, because the spectator's hand rested on his handlebars.
Well, the way his front wheel was whipped from underneath him, I think that's obviously what happened, because it turned around very quickly. And I tell you what, that was drama, the way he went down. He was so close to the spectators, and that is very rare for Armstrong to ride so close to the spectators, because he was trying to get inside where all of you can actually just, if you think about it, realize that he just clipped an elbow of somebody and went down very, very hard indeed.
What I think it was the tape of the handle of a musette, a little feeding bag, hooked onto his handlebars and snatched his bike away from him.
Amazing, amazing that he bounced up, amazing that he got back in. But I know a lot of people will be crying out now and say, well, why did Jan Ullrich wait for him? Why did Jan Ullrich not take advantage of the misadventure of a great champion like this? Well, I think the story we narrated just a few moments ago about the same thing or a similar thing happening to Jan Ullrich when he had a flat tyre. Armstrong did not take advantage of that at the foot of one of the Alpine passes. Right now, the favour has been returned. But I think what is remarkable is that Armstrong got back up. He didn't panic. He used his team and he got himself back into the race, and now he's on the attack. But this man still leads.
We're looking at the man here who is actually surviving now rather than racing, Sylvain Chavanel. 2 minutes 16 seconds, but despite all that commotion behind him, the gap has come down. This is the elbow of Lance Armstrong, a souvenir, nothing more than that. There's no real damage there, but I'm not sure that with 6.7 kilometers to go for the leader, Chavanel will make the summit now. Here is the big fight for the Tour de France, and this is it where it is happening. Ullrich is really hurting. His face never shows us this.
Look at the difference in the faces of the two men. A few days ago, the face of this man in the blue jersey of Team Bianchi was a concentrated face, a face of a man out on a mission. Right now, it's the face of a man going through pain, excruciating pain, and just wanting to keep himself in the bike race. The difference is, between the two men, Lance Armstrong is able to accelerate. Let's get a look at Armstrong's face here. This is the face that reminds me of Sestriere. This is the face that reminds me of the Alpe d'Huez. This is the face of the man on a mission this afternoon. And please, Mr. Spectator, keep out of the way, because we don't want that to happen again.
Well, it was perhaps an error of Lance to go so close to the crowd line on that corner. because that is always a possibility, because the spectator only views the cyclist at the last minute at that sort of an angle. But looking now, this is the battle now, one-on-one. Ullrich, if he can't catch Lance, must limit his escape. Remember, there are bonuses for the first 3 riders over the line these days in mountain tops, and that means a 20-second win bonus for Lance if he can get up to the leader on the road, and that might be the difference between victory this year and losing it.
This man himself in all kinds of purgatory, just trying to keep his pedals ticking over. He's well behind the Jan Ullrich group right now. He's trying to keep himself on the podium with the Tour de France. He started today 18 seconds down in the overall classification as we bob back up to Lance Armstrong. Out of the saddle. This is an unbelievable tempo he's ticking out here right now, Phil. It's absolutely perfection on a bike. He's ticking it out with the regularity that you normally only get in a metronome sitting on top of a piano.
Yes, and this man's doing exactly the same, and he's not overdoing it right now. He's at the top, but he's not at the very top. He has the ability, I think, just now to launch an attack to snatch those seconds back. Vinokourov, this is the battle of the big 3, the men who were covered by 18 seconds. It's all changing today.
It's all changing quite dramatically. Sorry about the little bit of picture breakup, but these are live pictures coming from the roads of the Pyrenees, and this man has been on the attack for an awful long time, Sylvain Chavanel. Whenever you see a man escape from a break like this, you want him to survive, but it is so difficult to survive when the race kicks up towards the skies. But look at the face further down the slopes of Jan Ullrich. He's going through all kinds of difficulties right now.
In trouble.
He's in serious trouble. It's not the first time. He's a bigger man than Lance Armstrong. He's carrying probably 15 kilos or 33 pounds more than Armstrong up the slopes of this mountain. And his climbing style is completely different. He climbs with power. And that's what people said about Armstrong in the early part of his career. You cannot climb the big mountains of the Alps and the Pyrenees using a big gear. You've got to use a small gear. You've got to spin at a high cadence. And that's something that Armstrong has learned ever since he came back from cancer in 1997. And since then, he's used a smaller gear in the mountains, and he can succeed in the repetition of cols that the Tour de France throws at you.
Vinokourov behind them all here, but don't forget, you take a look at those faces in that chase group. These are confused men now, and a bit like our camera at the moment, because they don't believe what is going on at the moment, because they were the men on the defensive, don't forget, and now on the attack rather for 3 weeks or 2 weeks. Now they're on the block defensive. This man heading for the 5-kilometer sign.
And I don't think he's going to win, because the last time check came through there at 1 minute and 10 seconds for Sylvain Chavanel over Lance Armstrong, and 1 minute and 40 seconds to the group containing Jan Ullrich. So there's 35 seconds between Lance Armstrong and Jan Ullrich for the moment, and we're not yet at the summit.
Time can be prized open to make the time trial a little bit more comfortable at the end of the week. But right now, this is the old Lance Armstrong, who's kept everybody in suspense for 16 days. And yet, his attitude changed yesterday. You could see his look in his face changed. He was beginning to look forward to the stages again. He was no longer haunted by the pressures of the race. He's back in his old pedaling style here now, and it's up to the others to bring him back. He's actually riding up here very, very quickly. 1:06 the gap now to the leader. And it is going to be bad luck for Sylvain Chavanel, but it looks to me as though Lance Armstrong's going to win the day.
Looks like he's going to win the day, and we're looking at a gap of 45 seconds between Lance Armstrong and Jan Ullrich, so the gap is certainly starting to open. And a lot further down the slopes, we're also looking at Alexander Vinokourov, who is just trying to keep himself in 3rd place in the overall classification.
Which he should do, but it'll be a lot further away from Ullrich and Armstrong by the end of the day. 46 seconds now, the gap between Armstrong and Ullrich. That takes him out to over 1 minute in front. That, I think, he'll think is a comfortable gap for the time trial, even if he isn't having a good day.
Plus, you can add to that an extra 20 seconds as well if we stop with the time gaps that we've got right now, because there'll be a 20-second winning bonus at the summit of this mountain for the first man to cross the line. And if anything happens, if nothing else happens, it should be this man. But what a face.
Well, he is giving it 110% now and more. This is it, the big chance. He's saying, this is it. I'm going to drive it home, and I'm going to win my 5th Tour de France. They aren't going to catch me. And he's going to do it and look back on the greatest tour he has ever ridden, because he's pulled himself off the ground to attack them.
And you can see there, just on his shoulder, the jersey is blurred where he slipped onto his back in a very hard crash, which could have been disastrous for him. He regards the time trial performance as disastrous, but that climb he had, that crash he had just a few moments ago, was very, very hard onto the ground. The face of Jan Ullrich, he's digging deep, he's looking for power, but there isn't enough power to respond to Armstrong on the slopes of this climb. He knows right now he's got to try and nail back the American as we bob up the slopes here to see Sylvain Chavanel, Phil. Well, and he's just said bridge to engine room, more power, and there isn't any.
No. Well, we're getting fancy addresses every day. Bit of a haunting man on the climb there, because Lance Armstrong now, there's a flotilla of motorcycles just in front. It could well be. He's now seen the man who's led this race out from the beginning today, Sylvain Chavanel, and won everything. These boys are still making Jan Ullrich do all of the work, because they've not a lot to gain if they don't, and they keep looking at him. Ullrich isn't asking for help now. This is 1-on-1, and the gap has opened in the other way that everybody here thought it would. And in fact, when Ullrich attacked on the Col du Tourmalet, we did not expect to see a reversal like this on Luz Ardiden.
He was worried about this climb of Luz Ardiden, and he thought by attacking so far out he could put Armstrong into difficulty. Well, he did for a few moments, maybe about 300 or 400 meters, but Armstrong did not panic. He picked up his pace, rode back onto the wheel of the German, and since then they have dominated all of the pace making at the front of this race. Looking down there at the wheels of Lance Armstrong, they're ticking by. He's using a fairly reasonable gear right now, but this is the face of the big game. He's definitely got the face that we've seen so many times in the past.
Minute and 5 seconds he's opened up now, so Ullrich is losing huge time here now. And this could well be the next few days, could be the victory of Lance Armstrong as he keeps his yellow jersey all the way to Paris. This is the big effort now. There is the catch. The first time anybody has seen this man for hours and hours today. He's won every prize on the road, but Lance Armstrong is going to have to deny him a win here, because he needs that win bonus of 20 seconds as well.
And of course he needs the pride, Phil, of winning a road stage of the Tour de France, because not very often do riders win the Tour de France without winning a road stage.
Only 4 times since the Tour.
I think the last one I remember was Greg LeMond.
There's 4 of them: Gaston Lencini, Lucien Aymar, 2 I can remember at the moment, and Roger Walkowiak was the other one. So those 4, nice pat on the back, very sportsmanlike by Lance Armstrong. He's no choice but to go on. I think if it wasn't such a matter of time, he would have let this man continue.
What a gesture. Armstrong is becoming a true people's champion this year. The crowd will be behind him. They won't deny the fact that he is a brilliant master tactician. He's ridden hard on several days, and I tell you what, he has hidden very well his bad days, because he has had bad days in this Tour de France this year, and he's been able to master them and not allow his opponents to see them. But right now, he's in position number 1, and this is quite remarkable.
Well, all of the effort is there, but he looks all strong again now, doesn't he? He's won 15 stages in this history of the Tour de France. Hasn't won 1 this year. His lead has looked ever so fragile. He's had to beat off the attacks. He's daily lost the race leader's yellow jersey. He's daily recovered it inches before he got to the finishing line. Now he's opened his gaps to what will be more than a minute at the finish. 4 kilometers to go. Remember, this is the man who was hooked off his bike by a spectator's musette. That's the little feeding bags the riders have, wrapped around his handlebars and dragged him down. He got up. His pedal clearly might have been slightly damaged, and it did it again. And then he launched an attack. And hats off to the big men too, because they waited for him to get back.
I can't figure out what Iban Mayo is doing here. He's bobbing up and down this group like a man possessed. He's off the front, off the back, in the middle. He really is, I think, frustrated by the fact that he's not been able to get away from the group, and that's because of this incredible pace that is being set by Jan Ullrich. Ullrich is one of the greatest champions in the world. He will not give up at all, and we have to give him an awful lot of respect for not taking advantage of Lance Armstrong when he was down on the ground. It's one of the unwritten rules of professional cycling. You do not take advantage of a competitor who's gone down with bad luck.
Not at the head of the field like these men have been. They're still at the zigzags. You can see it ahead there. They've still got to climb all those corners in what is the last 4 kilometers for Lance Armstrong. A little bit longer for Alexander Vinokourov. It's over 5 for him still to get up to the summit. He's hanging on now. He's fighting now to think of only a 3rd place in Paris, because that's what he's got to offer. He's got to hold the 2 Spanish climbers within 4 minutes by the finishing line. The Basque flags with the tailwind now. Expected to see an orange jersey blast through for the stage win. But they've all been surprised. They're seeing the leader of the Tour de France and probably now the winner, as Lance Armstrong is heading for the 3 kilometres banner. Jan Ullrich will never give up. This man never does. And he's going to hope he can recover in those last couple of kilometres, reduce the gap a bit, and then maybe fight his way into victory in the last time trial.
He's actually reducing the gap a bit right now. We've just got a time check of 1 minute and 5 seconds between Armstrong and Ullrich, and it's now just come down to 50 seconds. So Ullrich is doing a good job. He's not panicking. He's trying to ride at his own personal rhythm here, and if he can, he'll try and reduce that gap to 30 or 45 seconds by the finish.
And this one, I think, is holding on to third place right now. If Ullrich at 50 seconds, then Ullrich has pulled back nearly half a minute on Lance Armstrong in the last kilometre or so. So he has recovered. Either he's recovered or Lance has begun to lose his rhythm here. We're heading up steadily now. That'll be 3 kilometres to go, just over, or just under 2 miles. I've got a feeling that this man is building his tempo.
He's building his tempo. He's like a big diesel engine. It takes a long time to get to top speed, but when he does, he can cruise at that top speed for the whole day. His face is not the face of agony it was just a few kilometres ago. It's now the face of concentration. And Armstrong, somebody telling him it's 8 kilometres to go, but I'm sorry, Lance, it's 3. And that will be glory to his eyes, because it's going to take him about 9 minutes to get to the summit at speeds like this. He is not weakening at all, and Jan Ullrich is keeping himself in the bike race at 50 seconds for the moment.
A massive chase by Ullrich here. He has not given up this Tour de France by any manner or means. He is actually inching closer to Armstrong. This rider is such a proud bike rider. He's soaked in talent. Obviously, Lance hit him hard at the right time. It's a wonderful piece of ride here. Sylvain Chavanel, the hero of the day, now going through this elite group of climbers. But one day, if that man continues his improvements like that, he's going to be alongside Armstrong at the front.
It's a pity for Sylvain Chavanel. It was such a battle for superiority at the front end of the overall classification, because he may well have won the Tour de France stage this afternoon. Tyler Hamilton, by the way, is still in the group. They're just holding on to the back of the group with Jan Ullrich. Look at Ullrich breathing right now, just trying to get as much oxygen into those huge lungs of his to keep the engine ticking over. He's in pursuit of one man. Armstrong is number 1 on the road. Ullrich, for the moment, number 2.
The delighted crowds here have come all the way from the United States, and they've been given what they wanted. The sight of Armstrong pulling away from the Tour de France. I think not quite pulling away right now, because I think Ullrich is clawing him back slowly. What he is doing is still leaving a lot of conjecture about who will win this Tour de France if he can recover. He knows now that Armstrong will get a 20-second win bonus to add on to his time gains on the road. And at the end of the day, that might be significant. Now, this is Tyler Hamilton, who has slipped off the back, because they're the cars in front of that group containing Ullrich.
Well, what a great ride in the Tour, though, by Tyler Hamilton, who at the start of today was in 7th place in the overall classification. He was worried about the Pyrenean Mountains, because they are slightly different to the Alps, and he's had to get out of the saddle on many occasions just to keep the pressure going on the pedals. And that's what he feared with that double fracture to the collarbone. Armstrong, number 1. This man, Ullrich, number 2. Look at the face as he tries to find a bit more pressure to put down on those pedals, but he's now starting to rock the top half of his body a little bit. As we get towards the summit of the climb, it does get a fraction easier, and I suppose it's a little bit difficult to say that when you know they've been going uphill for 13 kilometres, but it levels out to around about 6.5%. 2 kilometres to go.
2 kilometres. It will seem like 20 miles now, because it kicks all the way to the line. That's the difference between this climb and Alpe d'Huez. It doesn't stop until you're over the line, right? People will be caught waiting to catch the riders when they cross the line, because there's no freewheel. It is staying uphill. And Jan Ullrich here, he looks to the right there to see if he can catch a glimpse in the crowd line of where exactly is Armstrong. He'll look for the helicopters too. He is still, and Morrow is now dangling off the back as well.
Well, I'm not surprised, because Jan Ullrich has pulled back a further 5 seconds on Lance Armstrong. It is now 45 seconds, the difference between Armstrong and the Ullrich group. And the time bonuses are going to be very important. Ullrich will have to try and get himself 2nd place, because there's a 12-second time bonus for the second man to cross the line.
Well, in real time at the moment, the difference is exactly 1 minute in the overall classification. At 2 kilometres to go now for Jan Ullrich, and he's still closing. You see the difference in the pedalling ratios here. Always fast cadence for Lance Armstrong, And if Ulrich can get a little bit of a faster cadence on his bike, and then of course he'll go quicker because he always pedals a higher gear.
It's amazing, the power of Lance. You can see in his face the concentration. He'd marked this day off in his book, but he wasn't sure whether he was going to be able to come up with this performance after being completely defeated by Jan Ullrich in the individual time trial. A beating of 1 minute and 36 seconds, something he has not ever seen in the Tour de France in the time trial since he began in 1999, coming back to win this event.
This has been an epic, epic Tour de France. It brought together two riders here to take us back into the 50s, when you saw Anquetil take on the 50s and 60s, when Anquetil took on Raymond Poulidor, shoulder to shoulder everywhere they went. These two riders are head and shoulders above the rest of the race, and it's a matter of pride now. It is one-on-one. Ullrich wants to beat Armstrong. He's always said it, and he's on the back burner now.
I think Armstrong's kicked it up a notch as well, because he's just gone back up a further 5 seconds to 50 seconds, while much further down the slope, Alexander Vinokourov really needs to stay within 4 minutes of the group of Jan Ullrich. He's doing fine right now because the two riders from Euskaltel-Euskadi are a long way behind him in 4th and 5th, but he dare not crack before the summit.
No, he's about 2 minutes behind the two men that matter. He's losing half of his advantage over them, though. But, of course, advantage might go back to Vinokourov now because hills are coming to an end. We still have a couple of Pyrenean mountains to come the day after the rest day tomorrow. We're looking at Jan Ullrich now. He has given everything that's left in his body to try and keep this man in his sights. He is convinced if he can keep him in his sights, he will win the Tour in the last time trial. Well, Armstrong might have other ideas about that. Look at the perspiration just running off his face. He's going to lose another 7 kilos today in body fluids, I think. But for this time, it's going to be a special thing. He's heading now to his 16th stage win of his Tours de France.
I don't think they'll ever make that mistake again, Phil. They will pay very much attention to temperatures out on the roads of the Tour de France, and I think next time they come, Lance Armstrong will probably have himself an air-conditioned warming-up room. Ullrich is going through all kinds of pain right now just to keep himself in with a chance of winning the Tour de France. Armstrong felt that even with a 15-second advantage going into the final time trial, he could still win it. He looks back at his old performance over the last few years, when in fact, out of the 8 Tour de France time trials he's ridden, he's won 6 of them. He's only been beaten by 2 men in the time trial. One was Santiago Botero, the other was Jan Ullrich. The gap is still now holding at 50 seconds, but this man's face is a picture of agony.
This must be the hardest kilometre in the life of Jan Ullrich. The same might be said for Tyler Hamilton here, who's still holding the Ullrich group in his sights. He too might move closer to the leaderboard tonight. This has been an exceptionally good day for him. But this is the man trying to write his name as equal only to Miguel Indurain with 5 straight wins in the Tour de France. He has gone a long way to doing that today, and he's done it in the most bizarre of circumstance, falling off when he was hooked off his bike by a spectator, and now he's gone away, and Ullrich slowed the group down to let him back in, so they started the climb again together, and then Armstrong went.
Inside 500 meters to go right now. He's still got to keep that cadence as high as possible. He has to make sure that he doesn't lose very much time over the last 250 meters, because this Tour de France is all going to be about seconds. Seconds will decide this bike race at the end of the day. But what a brilliant performance. And he's still, you know, Phil, this is an interminable climb. It's a beast of a climb, and it does not finish. Even after the finish line, it kicks up right towards the summit, towards Spain.
There's plenty of people waiting to catch the riders. I can promise you that as they come through here. The mist has come over the top. What an incredible day this has been. For 15 days we have shadowboxed one of the greatest Tours de France. Any one of 3 men could win it. They knew this climb was going to prove who was the best man. Armstrong, I think, in a week's time, will look back as winner of his 5th Tour de France, but I think we'll still be talking about who will win it when we get to the time trial, because Ullrich is a superbly good time trial rider. The American flags are flying now, though. This is a matter of pride again for Armstrong. A massive round of applause. No victory salute from Lance Armstrong. It's who's going to get hold of me, because the clock has started, and literally every second is now going to count.
Every second counts. The 2 riders from Euskaltel-Euskadi are trying to get themselves the bonuses, and that's going to steal that away from Jan Ullrich. The 2 men, Iban Mayer and Zubeldia, in 2nd and 3rd position, but these men have closed down an unbelievable gap over the last few meters.
Well, they've done the dirty there on Jan Ullrich, because he's not going to get a time bonus, which might be the difference between winning and finishing 2nd in the Tour de France. They're all round the corner, but they feel they're obliged to do this to show their Basque friends and countrymen that they were there. And fourth place for Jan Ullrich, and I make it about 42 seconds. 40-42, it's not official. But that means Lance were 40-55, 1 minute 15 approximately. Lance now leads the Tour de France. Surely that's enough.
It should be enough, but you know, this has been a Tour de France of changing stories all of this time. But look at this man, Tyler Hamilton. Day one, he went down in that crash in Meaux, and we never thought he would see the stage up to stage 2 start. And here he is battling it out in the Pyrenees, just 1 minute and 11 seconds behind. But it has been a huge showdown, and here is Alexander Vinokourov. He hasn't given up the ghost either.
Well, he's got, if he lost 4 minutes, he would have lost his third place. But don't forget, take off 40 seconds, because the many fears for losing that third place were 40 seconds behind Lance Armstrong. So he has done a tremendous ride here. He now will head off towards Paris after the rest day, still sitting in third place, but no longer 18 seconds behind Lance Armstrong. He is going to be looking now at almost, and maybe even more than 3 minutes, because he's coming up to the summit, and well, he's had to dig as deep as anybody else in this race today to come up and hold his position in this race. As they come round those bends so fast, they only just about get around them. As Alexander Vinokourov, just over 2 minutes has ticked by. It's only 1 minute 20 to the men that he's looking for to keep his third place. So he's well in. He's done a great ride. He will hold third in the Tour de France.
But he's really suffered on the slopes of Luz Ardiden. Here's faithful Chechu Riviera, the teammate of Armstrong. He did a great job in the early part of the climb. And fortunately, he came back into the group because he really was there to help Armstrong when he was needed.
Well, this is the face of Sylvain Chavanel. I hope the French crowd spot him and give him a great round of applause. So they keep coming up the climb. Chavanel won every prize on the day except the one at the finish. So the race is over, the presentations aren't. Lance Armstrong will come out for his 8th yellow jersey in a moment. Rejoin us then here on OLN. This was the one he wanted. And welcome back to the Tour de France. The Battle of Luz Ardiden has been solved, and the man who's stolen the day, Lance Armstrong, with a wonderful attack which was nearly spoiled by this accident. You saw the little bag there held by the spectator. Mayo went down as well. Armstrong got on his way again and recovered from what could have been an absolute tragedy in sporting terms. But there is good news for Jan Ullrich, the photo finish, and there's the second time for Lance when he didn't really get his foot back onto that cleat. But the good news for Ullrich is the photo finish has given him third place, so he has got a small time bonus, which means that he'll go out after the rest day tomorrow 67 seconds behind Lance Armstrong, and he gained more than that on Armstrong in the time trial. So we are still on a knife edge. That seems to be the only significant marks on Lance Armstrong's body. Just a scar on the left of his hand. Look at the effort here. Ullrich has suffered today to save the Tour de France, to fight another day, and he never, I don't think, expected Armstrong to ride so well. We're looking now at the man who was the hero of the day, Sylvain Chavanel. Look at this now. Armstrong congratulates the 24-year-old youngster in France for a great ride done, but now it's time to get on with winning the race itself. I honestly believe that Lance would have allowed him to win if he didn't need the time. In his usual time gaps, we're talking of minutes. He might have let him ride up with him. But now, with a 15-second advantage, he needed more time and the win bonus. Although he seemed to falter around the 4th to 5th kilometre, he suddenly found the legs to pick it up again as he came up to the line here. I think we can have a look at the stage results now, and in the end, the stage results which are brought to us by Pacific Life now show Jan Ullrich has been given third place on the photograph. He split the boys from Euskaltel Euskadi, Mayo and Zubeldia. Christophe Moreau is having his greatest tour, 5th there, the best Frenchman on the day and the best Frenchman overall. And we'll show you a bit further down, Ivan Basso has won the white jersey, his best young rider last year, still riding well in 6th place. Hamilton Marvellous ride by Hamilton. He came back again and held on for 7th place. Alexander Vinokurov finishing 2 minutes 7 seconds down in 8th place, which means that in the overall classification he will still hold on to his 3rd place. We can see that. There it is. Armstrong now, yes, 67 seconds behind, ahead of Ulrich rather. Vinokurov at 2 minutes 45, and he's still got a nice buffer over the climbers, Heimar Zubeldia and Eben Mayo. And those boys, of course, are finding the terrain less suitable in the final week of the Tour. Hamilton is now 7th in the Tour, as he was at the start of the day. Christophe Moreau has come up from 9th into 8th position, so he remains the top Frenchman. But the story of the day is Lance Armstrong. He has done an incredible ride, a massive crowd here on the mountain top, and the time for the day, it's just on 100 miles, almost exactly 100 miles a day, and the riders are doing it in 4.5 hours despite the mountains. There are people, a good cyclist, Paul, who wouldn't ride 100 miles in 4 hours on a flat road.
Phenomenal stage today, and I think hats off really to Jan Ullrich, Phil, because he went out very early on there and decided that he needed to attack Armstrong a long way for the finish. He was scared of Luz Ardiden because of the steepness, because of the severity of the mountaintop finish. He thought, throw caution to the wind, I'll see if I can put Armstrong into danger on the Col du Tourmalet. He did that, but what a great race.
And the harder these tours get in modern times, the better and more sporting the riders become. Ullrich wouldn't attack Armstrong when he'd heard he'd fallen, and as soon as Armstrong got back, he attacked Ullrich. That was fair play.
Well, those are the unwritten rules in the world of professional cycling, but it was quite remarkable to see the way Armstrong went down, because it was very dramatic indeed. He was actually riding very close, and you just see that bag there. It was a yellow bag.
The spectator didn't realise it had gone.
No, because it was whipped out of the spectator's hand. He or she was watching the race with complete and utter earnest, and Armstrong went down. Zubeldia didn't have Mayo, didn't have a chance to go over him. This was the second incident, and I don't know how he managed to keep that upright. That is the sign of a very agile bike rider, but Armstrong has proven to us during this Tour de France that he certainly knows how to handle his bike, because on the stage into Gap, he rode across a field to make sure he avoided an accident. It must have been a moment of panic for him, even though he still got up and...
Well, he was very lucky because his favourite teammate, Chechi Rubiera, was right there to stop, wait for him. That's the benefit of a strong team about you, and he's had that throughout this Tour. They've shown moments of fallibility, they've cracked, they've dropped back, but as soon as the road changes at the levels, they race back up to him, help as long as they can, then they fall back again. It's an incredibly loyal team.
It's incredible loyalty, but those men, they start the Tour de France with just one thing in the back of their minds. Lance Armstrong has to win the Tour de France. That's what they thought in 1999.
Has he done it now?
And that's what they do now. I think he's done it. He felt, even with 15 seconds advantage in the time trial, going up on Saturday from Pornic to Nantes, that he still could beat Jan Ullrich. He said, look at my record. He said, I've won 6 from the last 8 tours. I've never been beaten by such a huge margin. I made a serious mistake. 1 minute and 15 is comfortable. I think he'd be a lot happy with 2 minutes.
He's a rider of incredible confidence, even when he's being beaten or apparently being beaten. He shrugs all these things off, and that is the difference between a champion cyclist and somebody in the peloton. He just shrugs them off. He told us 3 days ago on television here on OLN, I'll be good in the next 2 days, and he was.
He certainly was, and he had this plan today to go out in the final few kilometres of the climb up to Luz Ardiden, because his acceleration, he knew with his acceleration over a few kilometres he could open a big gap up over Jan Ullrich, but that's why he didn't attack earlier on, because he knew he could lose an awful lot of time. But I don't think he expected the mechanical incident that happened out on the course and that very dramatic crash.
Yeah. It was very, very worrying, I can tell you that, and it just shows again the mentality of a champion. As you run in, you can probably see Lance Armstrong shaking his head. He's talking in French, and we'll bring you an interview in English when we can, but the French get the priority here, and I think this is one reason why Lance has become all of a sudden a friend of the French, because there's no secret of the fact he's always been criticised by the French, he's not sociable, etc., but now he speaks in French, and that's what they like about him. Now they're going to love him for winning this Tour.
They will, but the way he won it and the way he's proved to be a true champion, I think, and he has had difficult days in this Tour de France. We know that, Phil. He's been put under pressure, but he was able to hide that from his adversaries. And when he came down to the Pyrenees, he felt after that disastrous day, as he described deserves it in the individual time trial, but he still finished second, that he started to get better. He was improving. He knew what mistake he'd made. He hadn't kept his liquids topped up, and he wanted to lay down the law on the slopes of the Luz Ardiden. I feel a bit sorry for Sylvain Chavanel, and so too did Lance Armstrong, because true sportsman that he is, he congratulated the Frenchman on the way by. There was no way he could think about offering a victory to the Frenchman this afternoon, because for him, he had another agenda in his book, and that was to try and get as much time as possible over Jan Ullrich.
Well, perhaps somebody watching can tell me what's going to happen when the Tour resumes the day after tomorrow, because we've never predicted it yet. We've seen a different stage every day where things have happened we would never dream would happen. This has been, and I'm so happy for the organisation, it's happened in the centenary Tour, but this has been a marvellous tour in every way.
And it's not over yet. Let's not forget, after the rest day, we pick up with another mountain stage, and a lot of people have not really looked seriously at that mountain stage through the Pyrenees on the road down into Bayonne, but in fact this man has. Lance Armstrong, he goes out and checks every race route where he thinks the race could be difficult and dangerous, and that I think is where he proves his superiority. And that climb, Phil, is going to be very difficult the day after the rest day. The day after the rest day is always a strange day as well, because the body always reacts in a very difficult way, and those guys,
they didn't do much riding on the last rest day. A couple of hours all they did.
They'll do a lot more, because the difference between the last rest day and this one is they go back into the mountains. Yeah. It's not so bad with a flat stage coming up, but when you've got a mountain stage, you've got to be ready.
Now, Lance has won 74 races, I think I've got it right, since he turned professional. This was only his third win of the year.
He's a special bike rider. He picks his objectives through the season. Unlike Eddie Merckx, who used to come out and start winning and doing everything else, he just wants to go out and win the Tour de France. And I've got a feeling we've got Frankie Andreu with Lance Armstrong right now.
I have to cut you off, Paul, because Frankie Andreu is now with Lance, and he won't want to stay long. Let's go to Frankie.
I'm here with Lance. Lance, fantastic stage. Big confidence in this last week, even when you were feeling bad. Did you think you could pull it off?
The important thing is to feel better every day, and the way things were going, I was feeling stronger and stronger every day, and at the end I said, look, if we want to win the Tour de France, it has to be today. And so that was the plan. The team was again spectacular. It was a strange
yeah, let's jump to the crash. It looked like a hat just grabbed your brake hood, a total fluke accident. Was that the impotence for you to attack? A lot of people say it takes for you to get angry to go. It seems like right after that you were like, this is it.
That was during an attack. I mean, I had made an acceleration, and I think it was a musette that just grabbed my handlebar, and I saw it coming. I said, shit, I'm gonna hit this thing, and just caught the end of the handlebar, and there's nothing. Somebody's holding on to it, and it's holding on to your handlebar. I mean, you go down, and so.
Did you realize after that Tyler kind of went to the front, and everybody kind of waited to see what was going to happen?
Well, we got back pretty fast, so I figured they waited, which is it's very nice. I mean, maybe that was Jan's payback for waiting. For me waiting for him a few years ago when he went off on the Pure Sword, and so I appreciate that, and it's just an epic day.
All right, congratulations, good stage win. Thank you.
Well, there you are, and well, I'm not sure that Lance realised, except the fact they slowed down, but there's no doubt that Jan did pay him back, and if Jan was going to win this Tour, and don't forget he hasn't lost it yet, then I think today he'll be remembered for his fine gesture of sportsmanship. Okay, Lance Armstrong leads the Tour de France. That's the big news by 67 seconds. We haven't finished yet. The podiums when we return. We'll just take another break, and I imagine there'll be a huge cheer when Armstrong comes on the podium. Welcome back to the misty slopes, but the secrets are revealed here at Luz Ardiden. The 15th stage of the Tour de France has finished. The clock still counts, and while the clock still counts for the late finishers, Lance Armstrong has won his 16th stage of the Tour de France, his third victory of the year, and he has increased his overall lead to what some will feel a very comfortable 67 seconds. But above all, Paul, he's a stage winner now as well as a race leader, and that's important.
Confidence for him and confidence for the team, because the team will have felt that he was going to have a hard time winning his 5th Tour de France this year, because on one or two occasions he was put into difficulty, and he must have himself, Phil, asked his questions when he lost 1 minute and 36 seconds to Jan Ullrich in the individual time trial. But today he proved that he's back to his old form.
So Lance gets the applause there from the local dignitaries. Here are the results brought to us by Pacific Life, and that's Lance Armstrong finishing 40 seconds over Mayo. Ulrich gets it on the photo in third. Very valuable. Haimar Zubelda is fourth, and then Christophe Moreau did the ride of his life. He finished at 40 seconds as well there in fifth place. A little bit further down, we will see that Tyler Hamilton has done another great ride to maintain his high position. He finished seventh today at 1 minute 10. Ivan Basso confirming his white jersey victory of a year ago, because now he's a real good bike rider in the Tour de France. And Jose Luis Rubiera also getting into the frame today, the great teammate of Lance Armstrong, who was badly needed after this crash happened to Lance. Watch it carefully to the left of the picture. The bag hooked over his handlebars, and I don't think Lance saw it. It just snatched his bike out of his hands and down he went. And how lucky it was Ulrich, he got round him. And there he is, he's even staying up, he's not even getting off. They're just bringing out the next yellow jersey. He's got 8 of them now, which makes him the 4th most successful leader of any tour in 100 years.
And you can't say there was no drama on the roads of the Tour de France this afternoon, because Ulrich attacking on the Col du Tourmalet, a long way from the finish, about 45 kilometres from the finish. Armstrong responded to all of those attacks, but he basically laid down his plan to go out on the attack on Luz Ardiden. His plan today worked to perfection.
Well, that is a victory salute in Paris.
That's actually a wave. I've just seen Georgie Hincapie riding by in front of us, and that was a salute from Lance Armstrong to Georgie Hincapie to say, thanks very much, mate.
Well, as we show you Lance here coming up to the finish for the victory, as he climbs up to the line, every second counted, and in the end he's now gone out from 15 seconds overall to 1 minute and 7. This race is not over, of course. We finish in Paris next Sunday. We have a rest day tomorrow, but he'll feel a bit happier tonight. He won't be drinking the champagne yet, though. Alexander Vinokurov fought the whole day from the bottom of the Tourmalet, held on to his 3rd place and held off the challenge from Zubeldia and Mayo, the 2 Spanish climbers. They'll have a tough job getting over Alexander Vinokurov now. That could be the top 3 in Paris. Ivan Basso, Tyler Hamilton retains his 7th place. Morrow comes up a place from 9th. He swaps places there with Francisco Mancebo. And Carlos Sastre maintains his place in 10th position. I have to say that is an absolutely fabulous result. Lance Armstrong doing what he's done for a week now, is sign the souvenir maillot jaunes with the initials Henri Desgrange on them as founder of the Tour.
This is Richard Virenque on the podium, and just take a look at the gentleman on the left-hand side presenting him with their jersey, because that is Federico Barmontes, l'Aigle de Toledo, the Eagle of Toledo, the 6th-time winner of the King of the Mountains competition himself. Congratulating there Richard Virenque, who should surely win his title this year for the 6th time. And Federico there, Phil, he looks pretty cool.
Well, apart from the fact his hair's gone grey, it used to be jet black when he was winning his King of the Mountains titles, he looks exactly the same to me. And how fitting, he's congratulating Richard Virenque here, who is now the winner of the King of the Mountains for a record 6th time, the same as the Eagle. All he's got to do, though, is get to Paris to confirm it. If you drop out on the way, then you don't get the title.
What a sprightly man and a great rider. And one of the great stories about Barmontes was, in fact, he attacked on one of the mountain stages, got a 20-minute advantage, and sat at the top to wait for the peloton to catch him and had an ice cream.
Well, Richard Virenque nibbled away at the points, a bit further down here as he came up the mountains, but he still nibbled away at the points. This was over the top of the Aspen, I think. And then they just make the long descent off it. He got some points there. He didn't get much when he went over the Tourmalet. But it doesn't matter now. He can't be caught in this competition, and that's a great feeling to have won it so far out from Paris. There's a little example of the crowd. These are mostly officials, photographers, the police, who do such a great job. And everybody will leave the mountain in convoy after the race is all up. But while you can see the clock counting there in the distance, 24 it is at the moment. But when it goes black, it means the elimination time has been passed and the riders come in and are eliminated. So all those boys just coming in are in fact okay. As we go back to the podium, this is Denis Menchov, the Russian rider who is consolidating his lead in the white jersey. He's moved so far ahead that, barring a non-finish in Paris, he is going to win this. All fits very nicely.
Well, he's a great bike rider, and he certainly is a star of the future. And in fact, he won a couple of years ago the Tour de l'Avenir, which is the sort of the young and up-and-coming riders Tour de France, which was then that everybody realised that this guy was going to be a great bike rider for the future.
Many of you asked, by the way, how does a rider come out in a lead his jersey have the correct sponsors on. It's because they're busy ironing them on behind the scenes before he comes out and has the jersey presented. So there we are. We're not going away. We're going to come back again and have a look at this extraordinary day in the Tour de France. So we'll only be gone a few minutes. Join us right back here on OLN. And welcome back as the crowd still await the stragglers to finish on top of Luz Ardiden. It's nearly half an hour now since Lance Armstrong won the day. And Paul, I'll ask you again, has he won it by enough to win the Tour de France?
Well, I think he's got a fairly serious chance of winning right now because he felt that even 15 seconds was good enough. But I'll tell you one thing, Phil, that crash on the climb up towards Luz Ardiden was an unbelievable moment of drama in the Tour de France today. I don't think Lance could have at all thought that that was going to happen, but the way he bounced back, the way he got himself back into the groove, I think that is the sign of an absolutely true champion.
Well, there's no doubt about that, but I thought he had a serious pedal problem. I was wondering why I wasn't calling for a new bike, but obviously it was just a problem getting settled down again.
I think it was the panic, the moment he was trying everything to get back into the group. He had no idea at the front of the bike race that those guys had actually waited for him, and that is one of those unwritten rules in the sport of professional cycling. Never take advantage of somebody who goes down with a mechanical incident or a crash.
That's fair enough. Everybody wants to be a winner in the right manner. All right, well, that's it from us. Been another great day in the Tour de France. You know, I'm sleeping well every night. We'll go down now to Kirsten Gum and Bob Roll.
All right, thank you, Phil. Boy, it has been quite an amazing day. I mean, if I had to sum it up all in one word, it would be intense.
Very
intense.
Very intense day out on the roads of the Tour de France. A great champion. The hallmark is that they win a stage at least once on the road during their pursuit of the yellow jersey. Lance Armstrong physically didn't have the opportunity to do that so far. Psychologically, he would have loved to. And finally today, everything came together just right. He almost lost it all because he got it tangled up with the spectator and went down there. Unbelievable. Then he couldn't get back into the pedal quite right, and so he slipped out of that again to be able to get back up after you've crashed while you're on the attack, and then to attack again, especially a man of the class of Jan Ulrich is absolutely amazing. Ulrich himself very courageous, attacking over the Tourmalet, not to show that he's going to wait for the time trial, take it easy, limit his losses, but to go out on the attack on the Tourmalet and ride as a true champion himself. We see a huge battle between two great bike riders. Lance Armstrong getting a little bit of an advantage today, and the Ulrich camp having a little bit of hope-induced amnesia. I think they've forgotten exactly who the big dog is, and Lance Armstrong now sharpening his teeth on the bones of the great German champion, Jan Ulrich. What an incredible day. This is the best bike race, I can honestly say, the best bike race today that I've ever seen in my life. Watching
Lance Armstrong come up this last bit right over here, I am still shaking. I mean, as we get engulfed by all this fog that has been up here on the summit of Luz Ardiden, I mean, I need you to explain again how these riders showed so much class on the road and the courtesy on the road when Lance Armstrong went down, how everyone waited.
These are the toughest men on earth.
Oh, yeah.
There's no doubt about it. Classiest guys, and bike racing is all about suffering, and so when you can do a little bit of compassion to get the race to get to the logical conclusion, people are willing to do that just because the nature of the sport, it is so beautiful, and it's such a compelling allegory to real life. You help out, you compete, and at the end, the best man wins.
Well, and at the second day, second rest day of the Tour, Lance Armstrong remains in yellow for a 7th day. I hope he sleeps in that thing tonight. I hope he wears it all day tomorrow.
He most certainly earned that one today.
Yes, he did. Well, it is a rest day tomorrow, but don't worry. Here on OLN, we are going to recap stages 11 through 15, and we have a lot of action for you. That is tomorrow from 8 p.m. until 11 p.m. Eastern Time. And don't forget, you can always check us out on the web. That's olntv.com for all our programming schedule information, as well as articles from Phil, Paul, and Bob. From here in France, that's going to do it for our entire OLN crew. We're going to say tonight, and we're going to see you tomorrow.